"You'll be in row 14, next to the service area," the coordinator droned, while my daughter-in-law smiled coldly. "My family will lose face if your poverty shows." My son lowered his head and stayed silent. No defense, not a single kind look. In the glittering hall, over strings and clinking glasses, I, the groom's mother, was seated behind even the photographers. I tightened my grip on the champagne flute, hearing the glass tremble in my hand. 10 years a widow, 40 years raising a child, and all I was worth was a seat at the very end. I didn't cry. I lifted my chin and walked straight to the last row as if I were stepping over my life's worst humiliation. And when I sat down, a silver-haired man in a sleek black suit placed his hand over mine and whispered, "Let's pretend we came together." I turned, my heart stopping. He was the first love I thought I'd lost forever. They had no idea that from that moment on, the one getting pushed out of a seat today wouldn't be me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Mabel Carter, 66, widowed for 3 years. I taught English at a public high school on Chicago's South Side for more than 40 years. I'm not wealthy, but I get by on my pension and the small house my husband and I owned. I thought I'd made peace with loneliness after my husband, Harold, died of lung cancer. But today, at my son's lavish wedding, I finally understood. Real loneliness is when people are alive and still deny you basic respect. The ceremony was at the Devon estate, a sprawling property owned by Camille's family, the very people who never accepted me from day one. Everything felt so showy it was almost numb. Tables draped in crisp white, Moet and Chandon flowing like a stream, guests in designer labels, and white roses stretching out like Versailles. In my clean but worn navy dress, I felt like an ink stain on a luxury canvas. When staff pointed me to my seat, I almost couldn't believe it. Row 14, directly behind the service area after the photographers and the flower handlers. Up front, Camille's mother, Patricia Devon, sat among a row of society women in gleaming pearls. They looked at me and murmured. I clearly heard one say to the woman beside her, "Is that the groom's mother? I heard she taught at a public school, must have been rough." Another gave a small laugh, her voice dripping with disdain. "I heard she had to pick up extra shifts at the library just to make ends meet." I said nothing. I sat on the cold chair, back straight, hands on my lap, willing myself not to shake. Up at the front, Bryce looked different, tailored suit, perfect smile, standing with the ease of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be poor. I remembered the little boy who came home with muddy sleeves, handed me a bunch of dandelions, and said, "Mom, these are for you because you're the prettiest in the world." I smiled, then felt my nose sting. Where did that little boy go? The music rose. Camille came down the aisle in a wedding gown so long it needed 2 people to carry. Light flashed off the diamonds at her throat, making me squint. She never looked at me, not once. I was a shadow she wanted erased from the frame. Just as I was about to lower my head to escape the contempt around me, the chair beside me slid. An older man, silver hair shining in the sun, sat down. A whisper of bergamot cologne drifted over. He wore a Swiss watch. His movements were slow, refined. I thought he'd made a mistake and was about to say something when I heard his voice, low, steady, certain. "Let's pretend we came together." I froze. He leaned in with a calm smile and gently set his hand over my clenched one. The touch made me stiffen for a few seconds, but strangely, there was no embarrassment, only warmth. From the front, I saw guests beginning to turn. Their eyes changed from pity to curiosity, and then, slowly, to caution. A woman in a feathered hat whispered to her husband, "Who's that man with the groom's mother? He looks powerful." I didn't turn, but I caught the hint of a smile at the corner of the man's mouth. On the stage, Bryce glanced down and his gaze landed on us. In that instant, his face went pale. I saw his lips move like he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. Camille followed his stare. When she saw me smiling, speaking with the mysterious man, her face went rigid. I didn't know what game I'd been pulled into, but I could feel the power dynamic shift. Those who'd looked down on me were now more careful. Those who had turned away began to watch. I tilted my head and whispered, "I don't understand what you're doing." Without looking at me, he said, "Just smile. Your son's about to look again." I did. When Bryce glanced down a second time, he looked as if he'd seen the impossible. In the very spot where he'd arranged for his own mother to be humiliated, I now seemed to be, seated with a man worthy of the front row, maybe even their betters. "Perfect," he murmured, squeezing my hand a bit. "Now they don't know where to place you in their picture anymore." I looked at him, a mix of surprise and gratitude in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked softly, just for him to hear. He tilted his head, deep blue eyes holding an answer I'd waited for my whole life. Someone you should have crossed paths with again a long time ago. I didn't have time to grasp it all. The minister kept speaking, violins kept playing, and all eyes stayed on the couple. But I knew, with a few light touches and a smile, the entire order of this event had cracked. Half skeptical, half curious looks stayed on us through the ceremony. I caught fragments of whispers. "Is he someone in finance? He looks familiar. Wasn't he on the cover of Forbes?" I didn't reply, only pressed my lips together and looked up at the platform where my son vowed himself to a woman who had tried to banish his mother to the service row. Oddly enough, I felt calm. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. A breeze from the garden brushed my hair, as if whispering, "It's time, Mabel." I didn't know why the words rang in my head, but my heart did. This wasn't Bryce's wedding day anymore. It was the day I came back to myself. I didn't know who the man beside me truly was or why he chose to help. But from the way he held my hand and redirected the room's gaze, I sensed something was about to change for good. When the applause started, I stood up on instinct. He leaned toward my ear and said, "Let them wonder." I looked around. The people who'd pitied me now watched like I was a riddle. Up front, Camille's mother frowned. Bryce glanced down, eyes frantic. Camille gripped his hand tighter, afraid, unsettled, and lost. And me? I simply smiled. For the first time in years, I felt light. Deep down, I knew no one had the power to make me sit in the last row anymore. As the wedding music faded and the clapping thinned, the man at my side tipped his head and spoke softly, just for me, "We finally meet again, Mabel." I lifted my face to ask who he was, and the slant of afternoon light across his silver hair revealed deep blue eyes, the exact blue I'd memorized half a century ago. I froze. The sound around us, music, chatter, fell away until only his face remained. "Sebastian?" My voice caught in my chest. He smiled and nodded slowly. "Call me Seb, the way you used to." I could hardly breathe. That name, I hadn't spoken it in 50 years. I thought I'd forgotten, but memories don't die, they only sleep. We stayed quiet for a few minutes as the clapping dwindled and the crowd drifted off. I noticed his hand still holding mine warm, steady, as if no years had passed at all. "You've changed a lot, but your eyes haven't," Seb said gently, his voice deeper and a touch rough with age. "When the minister read the vows, you still bit your lip." I saw. I laughed through a tight throat, embarrassed, and moved. "You remember things like that?" "I don't forget anything about you, Mabel. Especially the things that once made life feel meaningful." I looked away, hiding the tear that had slipped free. As people began to scatter, Seb said, "Walk with me? I've got a lot to tell you." I nodded. We left the reception and wandered into the garden behind the mansion, where rows of lavender perfumed the evening breeze. Voices and laughter faded, leaving only the soft crunch of our shoes on gravel. I looked for you for years, Seb began, eyes straight ahead. That year I went to London for a business program. I thought I'd be gone a few months. I wrote you dozens of letters, sometimes one every week, sent to your old home address. I stopped. A breeze shivered across my shoulders. I never got a single one. Seb turned, his eyes filling with shock and a deep sadness. Not one? No calls, no messages? I shook my head. Not a word. I thought you'd forgotten me or found someone else. My mother told me you were the kind of man who only cared about money. Seb closed his eyes, exhaling hard. Margaret, I suspected. When I came back, I called and was told you'd moved with no forwarding address. I went to the house, but they said it had been sold. I was quiet, his words falling like rain on a field of parched memories. Loose pieces slid into place, years of waiting for letters that never came, my mother's refrain, marry someone stable, don't be foolish for love, I whispered, almost confessing. She hid everything. She even erased the messages on the landline. I was naive and believed you'd moved on. Then I met Harold, kind, steady, safe, and convinced myself it was for the best. Seb stepped closer, eyes glassy. I came back to Chicago twice after that, once in 1978, then in 1980. The first time, I hired someone to find you, but you were married. The second time, I saw your wedding photo in the paper and knew I was too late. I gave a small, aching smile. 50 years late, Seb. Maybe fate kept a sliver of mercy for us. He nodded, voice rough. I never married. There were a few women, but I couldn't keep going when I kept comparing them to you. For years, I read about you, your teaching awards, the students you helped. You were always the person I believed would change the world, quietly but for real. I turned away, not wanting him to see my red eyes. Thank you, but I was just a regular teacher. My life was calm, safe. Only sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wondered, if your letters had reached me, would I be sitting here with you now? Seb touched my arm lightly. Don't blame yourself, Mabel. We did what we thought was right. I only regret we let someone else decide for us. The words lodged in my throat. I thought of my mother, strict, controlling, obsessed with the safest path. I loved her, and I resented her. Because of her, my life turned a different way. We stopped by a small garden pond, its surface catching the late sun. Seb sat on a stone bench and motioned for me to join him. He pulled a small object from his pocket, an old photo with yellowed edges. A young woman with brown hair smiled brightly, holding a fistful of wildflowers. I've carried this since 1972. My hands shook as I took it. I thought you'd have thrown this away long ago. No, he said with a soft smile. I once thought if I kept it, I'd never love anyone else. Then I realized letting go isn't forgetting, it's accepting that love can exist even when the person isn't there. I looked down at the photo, my voice small. I loved Harold, Seb, truly. But he never saw me the way you did. Our marriage was peaceful, responsible, affectionate, but it didn't have a spark. Maybe I learned to live without being seen. Seb pressed a hand to his chest. And I, somehow, lived as if I were still seeing you. Strange, isn't it? A man can pass 1,000 faces and only remember one pair of eyes. I steadied myself. You know, some nights I dreamed we were back at Romano's, the little Italian place on 12th Street where I used to steal the olives from your salad. Seb laughed deep, still young somehow. And you got caught because I counted how many were left. I remember. You blushed the whole evening. We both laughed, the sound mixing with lavender on the air and the hush of water, like memories getting dusted clean. My life has gone far from where we started, Seb said after a quiet moment. I built a company, met politicians, walked into rooms full of powerful people. And in moments like that, I remembered the 18-year-old girl on the front steps, reading Whitman to me. My throat tightened. Don't say these things, Seb. We're too old to dream like that. He smiled, tipping his head, eyes still bright as ever. No, Mabel, we don't need to go back. We only need to choose the next 20 years well. I stayed quiet. The pond reflected two older people sitting side by side, two who once loved madly, lost each other to pride and control, and now sat hand in hand, no longer young, but no longer afraid. The breeze lifted the lavender again. I looked at him for a long time, feeling something strange, peace and revival twined together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure. My tired heart could still say yes. We were still by the pond when urgent footsteps sounded behind us. I turned to see Bryce and Camille striding over, faces tight like they were rushing to put out a fire. Her gown snagged on the grass, but she didn't care. She yanked Bryce along. "Mom, right now," Bryce said, low but rattled. "We need to talk." I exhaled, staying seated. Beside me, Seb remained steady, eyes on the two kids coming toward us, unruffled. Camille reached us first, stared straight at Seb, and spoke like a blade. "Who are you?" Seb smiled, stood, adjusted his tie like he was stepping into a meeting, and answered evenly, "I'm someone who once mattered a great deal to Mabel." The air froze. Bryce blinked, as if trying to assemble pieces he'd never seen before. Camille frowned, stepped back, then dropped her voice to a sharp hiss. "I'm serious. This is my son's wedding, not a place for strangers." I rose, voice calm. "Camille, you're speaking to my guest, and he is most certainly not a stranger." Seb gave me a brief nod enough to steady me. He said clear and level, "I'm sorry if my presence bothers you, Miss Devon. But perhaps you should worry more about how you treat your mother-in-law than about other people's resumes." Camille froze like she'd been slapped. Bryce reached out, trying to ease the moment, but Seb went on before they could speak. I watched from start to finish a mother pushed to the last row at her own son's wedding. Humiliation dressed up as honor and money. I heard Bryce take a sharp breath. "No, you've got it wrong," he said quickly. "It was just a seating mix-up. Staff placed the rows wrong. There was no intent." I faced my son and held his eyes. "A mix-up or a choice, Bryce?" He went quiet. For me, that question needed no answer. Camille jumped in, scrambling to salvage control. "Mabel, I think you're being too sensitive. Everyone was busy and, our family's reputation had to be protected." "Reputation?" Seb cut in, still polite but cool. "If your reputation is built on diminishing others, you might want to revisit your definition." Color rose beneath Camille's makeup, whether from shame or anger didn't matter. Bryce looked lost, fingers tight around his glass. He glanced at me, as if asking me not to make this worse. This time, I didn't rescue them. Seb slid a hand into his pocket, speaking slowly with the weight of power he didn't need to flaunt. "As it happens, I just finalized a deal 2 weeks ago. My firm, Whitmore Capital, acquired the downtown commercial building where Devon Realty Group has its headquarters." The air changed instantly. Bryce's head snapped up. Camille looked like she didn't trust her ears. "What did you say?" she stammered. "The building on Michigan Avenue?" Seb nodded, gaze calm to the point of merciless. "That's right. The deal closed last week. I only remembered the detail when I saw the Devon logo on the wedding stage." Silence crashed over the garden. Camille's face drained, her expensive makeup no match for raw panic. Bryce stood still, mind racing. Seb looked at them, his voice quiet. No need to raise it. "I hadn't planned to discuss business here, but perhaps this coincidence is well-timed." Then he turned to me, the gentle smile returning. "Mabel, it's been a long day. We should leave. There's a place by the lake I'd like to take you to dinner, if you're willing." I smiled, no hesitation. "I'd like that." Camille's eyes widened. "You're leaving in the middle of the reception?" People are waiting for the family photos." I turned, answering softly but clearly, "Family? Are you sure that's what you want to capture?" "A mother parked by the service station?" Bryce drew a breath, ready to say something, but I stepped forward, slower and firmer than I'd ever been. "I'm not an obligation for you to manage anymore, Bryce. From now on, I choose my own place." Seb held out his hand. I placed mine in his, and a strange steadiness spread through me. Simple, but the whole garden seemed to hold its breath. As we walked away, whispers trailed behind, curiosity edged with respect. Someone murmured just, loud enough for me to catch, "Is that really Sebastian Whitmore? And he's with the groom's mother? I can't believe it. If so, the Devons are in trouble." I didn't look back. I only held Seb's hand and followed the stone path to the back gate. The breeze moved through the maples, lavender and champagne mingling in the air. With every step, another layer of old dust fell away. At the car, Seb opened my door like we were 20 again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "If I'd known today was your son's wedding, I'd have come sooner. Maybe everything happens for a reason." I looked at him, a feeling I couldn't name rising relief and ache twined together. "You don't owe me an apology, Seb. If anyone does, it's those who treat love and respect like bargaining chips." He smiled, soft as the afternoons I remember. "Then tonight let me feed you well and talk for a long time like two old friends waking from a long dream." His car rolled out of the garden, catching the last light on the glass. Through the window, I watched the trees sway and Bryce and Camille shrink into the murmuring crowd. No one walked us out, and no one dared stop us. But I knew, in many eyes left behind, pity had vanished, replaced by something else: respect. I turned to the man at the wheel and asked quietly, "You know, all day I thought I was completely alone, but I wasn't, was I?" Without looking away from the road, Seb answered, "No one is truly alone, Mabel. Sometimes the one who sees us best walks in just when we think our light's gone out." I sat back, watching the window turn gold with sunset. For the first time in years, my heart beat slow and peaceful, and somehow stronger. I didn't know how the night would end. I only knew this: the woman in row 14 didn't sit there anymore. Lakeview Terrace sat right on Lake Michigan, walls of glass catching the last spill of daylight. Evening light washed the silk curtains gold. Soft, jazz drifted in a mellow saxophone threading through the quiet clink of silverware and the low laughter of a few couples nearby. Seb chose a small corner table facing the water, where white sails in the distance looked like fragments of memory floating by. He pulled out my chair, still precise and thoughtful, as if 50 years had never been cut away. "You still like sitting by the window," he said gently. "Remember the first time at Romano's? You chose the table by the glass so the light would hit the food just right." I laughed, fingers brushing the water glass. "You remember that?" "Everything connected to you," he said, eyes warm and deep. The server arrived. Seb didn't need a menu. Lasagna with beef, a caprese salad, no onions, and a small pour of Italian red, not chilled. I stared at him, astonished. "That's exactly what I ordered 50 years ago." He only smiled and nodded for the server to go. We let a gentle silence settle. I watched the ripples on the lake mirror the first city lights. It was so peaceful I didn't know where to begin. In the end, Seb spoke first. He wanted to know how I'd been living all these years. He'd read in the papers that my students loved me, but he wanted to hear it from me. I smiled, slowly. I taught English for 42 years. Maybe what makes me happiest is when former students come back to visit. Some bring their little kids and say I'm the reason they went to college. I paused, then continued. In those last years I was teaching while caring for Harold. His illness stretched on for more than 2 years. Every evening I read him the Whitman poems he loved. After he was gone, I kept reading, as if he were still sitting there. Seb listened without interrupting. Now and then he nodded, his eyes holding a sorrow I didn't dare look at for long. After Harold died, I thought I'd gotten used to loneliness. I went on, my voice turning hoarse. But really, I was just living in silence. Bryce called me every 2 weeks, right on the dot, asked the same 3 questions. Are you well? Do you need anything? I'm very busy. That tone, like he was calling out of obligation, Seb sighed. I understand. Obligation is the worst form of love. It pretends to care, but the heart is gone. I gave a small laugh, then asked, What about you, Seb? Did you ever have someone? He leaned back slightly, looking out at the lake. Yes, a few, but it always felt unfair to them. No matter how good they were, I kept comparing them to someone who'd gone very far away. In the end, I chose to live alone. Alone, but not empty. Maybe because I always believed you were okay somewhere. That line made my heart pinch. For a moment, I saw the 18-year-old boy again, sitting under the tree in front of my house, notebook in his arms, smiling every time I read a poem. The server brought our food, the lasagna fragrant and steaming. I took a bite. The richness of meat, cheese, and tomato sauce spread across my tongue, and I suddenly laughed. What is it? Seb asked. It's just, this tastes as good as it did back then. And I almost cried because of it. Cry if you want. There's nothing wrong with letting yourself be moved. I shook my head, swallowed slowly, then whispered, No, I don't want to cry anymore. I want to remember it with a smile. We ate unhurriedly, each sentence filling in the gaps of the years we'd lost. When the red wine was topped off, Seb rested an elbow on the table, the light casting a warm gold in his eyes. Mabel, we can't turn back time, but we can choose tomorrow. I looked at him in silence. Inside me, something both strange and familiar stirred, as if an old heart were waking from a long sleep. You make it sound too simple, I answered, my voice trembling. Because it really is simple. Happiness doesn't need magic, only the courage to start again. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced down 7 missed calls from Bryce and 3 messages from Camille. They all said the same thing. Who is Sebastian Whitmore? Mom, where are you? Do you know what kind of man he is? I set the phone face down and exhaled slowly. They've started digging into you. Seb smiled lightly. Of course, the Devons never rest easy when they don't know what someone can do to them. Aren't you afraid? I asked, half joking, half serious. Afraid? I've been through much bigger battles. They should only be afraid if they keep looking down on people. I laughed. You're as confident as you used to be. No, Mabel. I just believe in the justice of cause and effect. Those who sow contempt will bow their heads to reap it. I switched the phone to silent. For the first time in years, I didn't feel compelled to respond to my child right away. A quiet settled over me, not loneliness, but true peace. What are you planning after you leave Chicago? I asked, nudging the talk away from power and shadows. Seb leaned back, eyes far away. I've been thinking about Tuscany. There's a small village called Montefiorale. Good wine, clear skies, lavender blooming all summer. I laughed. You don't have a house there. He chuckled back. I'll buy one. We both laughed freely, not tamped down by politeness or fear of judgment. I realized it had been a very long time since I'd felt this kind of positive excitement, not worry, but the anticipation that something good might come. After the meal, Seb called for the check before I could reach for my wallet. Let me. You can get the next one, if we meet again. I looked at him and smiled. You just wrote the next invitation yourself. I know. And I hope you won't cancel. At the door, the lake breeze slipped in with a touch of salt and cold. I pulled my wrap tighter, watching the city lights flicker in his eyes. Thank you for dinner, Seb. Thank you for coming. If you hadn't walked to row 14, I might never have had the chance to see you again. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because any words felt extra. I simply nodded and turned away. When I climbed into a cab home, the phone buzzed again, 4 more missed calls from Bryce. I watched the screen glow in the dark, then tapped mute notifications. That night, I didn't call back. I sat by the window, looking out at Lake Michigan shimmering in the moonlight, and realized it had been a long time since I'd felt this light inside. Tomorrow, I'd have to face Bryce and Camille and that world out there. But tonight, it was just me and the calm of being seen, heard, and remembered. And somewhere in Chicago, I believed Seb was looking out at the lake too, facing the same direction where the lights met the water and the past finally let go. 3 days after that evening, by the lake, my phone rang while I was watering the plants on the porch. Bryce's voice came through, trying to sound steady but failing to hide the strain. "Mom, are you free tonight? Camille and I want to take you to dinner at River House." River House, the most upscale restaurant in Chicago, the kind you book a week ahead. I knew they weren't inviting me out of filial devotion. I wiped my hands and smiled slightly. "Of course I can go." On the other end, Bryce exhaled, like he'd just completed a tough assignment. That evening, the restaurant glowed with candlelight, the polished wood floor reflecting warm gold. I arrived on time in a simple blush pink dress and the pearl earrings Harold once gave me. When the server opened the private room, I saw Camille already seated, wearing a French label I'd seen on a magazine cover. Next to her, Bryce scrolled his phone, looking worn out. "Mom." Camille stood and flashed a radiant smile like nothing had ever happened between us. "You look wonderful tonight. Your skin is glowing. Must be that good company makes people shine, right?" I looked at her, smiling lightly but not too much. "That's right, Camille. Good companies, good partners, and good manners, those things always make people shine." Bryce's hand paused on his water glass. Camille pressed her lips together, trying to hold the smile. We sat. The private room felt luxurious but cold, like a meeting wrapped in velvet. Under the table, Seb quietly took my hand. He sat beside me, composed, his gaze calm and steady. That handhold wasn't showy, but it made me feel strangely safe, like a reminder I wasn't alone anymore. The server poured wine and slipped away. Camille started with small talk vacations, new projects, charity events. Everything came out in a flat, practiced tone, like she was executing a strategy rather than having a conversation. I stayed quiet, smiling at the right moment so she wouldn't know how. Clearly I was listening. When the main course arrived, grilled wagyu with truffles, Bryce set down his knife and looked at me. "Mom, I actually wanted to talk a bit about work." I took a sip of wine. "Yours or mine?" he faltered. Camille cut in, voice soft as fluff but edged with calculation. "Whitmore Capital just bought the building where our company's headquarters are. It would be wonderful if your side could consider keeping the current lease. We could all benefit." Seb looked up, not rushing. He cut a piece of meat with measured movements, then said evenly, "Business is business, Miss Devon. No one gets to change terms based on personal ties if the conditions aren't right." I saw a tendon jump in Camille's neck. Bryce forced a thin smile and tried, "I think things can be flexible as long as both sides want it." Seb set down the knife, a rare sharpness flickering in his eyes. "I'm only flexible with people who know how to show respect." The braze. Words drifted out like a breath, yet the room fell absolutely silent. I straightened, set my glass down, and said gently but clear, "Before we talk business, maybe we should talk about something more important. Respect." Bryce looked at me, flustered. "Mom, I know there was a little misunderstanding at the wedding." I cut in. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You chose to seat me in the last row, behind the service area. You chose silence when your wife said my poverty would shame her family." Camille jumped in fast. "I didn't mean harm, Mabel. I just wanted the ceremony to look perfect." I'm sorry if my words hurt you. I looked straight at her, my voice low but firm. Camille, are you sorry you said it, or sorry it has consequences now? I wasn't angry. I just needed a sincere apology. But sometimes sincere is the hardest thing to give. And when someone apologizes to you, what makes you believe they truly regret it? Share it with me, so I know I'm not the only one who's wrestled with that. The question made Camille choke up, and Bryce lifted his eyes to mine, torn between guilt and confusion. He took his wife's hand, his voice getting smaller. Mom, I really am sorry. I shouldn't have stayed silent that day. I just didn't want to mess up the ceremony. Mess it up? I asked softly. More than seating your mother by the service station? You once promised your father you'd never make me feel left out. That day, I've never felt more foreign to my own son. Bryce lowered his head. I heard a spoon gently tap a plate. Camille set it down, trying to hide her irritation. Seb spoke up, quiet but impossible to dismiss. Whitmore Capital didn't buy that building to make trouble. But we respect principles. Those who act right will always be treated right. They both understood. Camille slid back into politeness. Of course. I just thought, we're family. We could find a way to work together so no one loses. I took another sip of wine, the tannins blooming lightly on my tongue. Family isn't a contract, Camille. I don't need collaboration. I need respect. She forced a smile and shifted to congratulating the fresh start of our marriage, but her voice had lost its ease. I listened, but said nothing more. The meal ended in polite silence. Only the distant jazz filled the space between us. When the server cleared dessert, Seb stood first and pulled out my chair. I think we should go, Mabel. Let's not let anyone mistake this for a negotiation. I rose and turned to my son. Bryce, I hear your apology. But forgiveness takes time. It's not something you can propose. He nodded, eyes damp but controlled. Camille stood still, lips pressed tight. Before I left, I looked at the two young people, the child I raised with sweat, and the woman I once believed would make him happy. I hope when you say, I'm sorry, it's because you mean it, not because you're afraid of losing a contract or status. No one answered. The table light reflected my face calm, not angry, not bitter. I turned and walked out with Seb. On the way home, the city blazed, towers like glass blocks against the night. In the car, Seb stayed quiet, giving me room to think. After a while, he said softly, You held the ground, Mabel. I'm proud of you. I looked out the window, a faint smile rising. Maybe I finally learned what you've known all along, that silence can be stronger than words. He nodded and found my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. That night, I didn't feel tired. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I'd walked out of a conversation without feeling smaller. I didn't forgive quickly. I know forgiveness is a privilege, and this time, I won't hand it out easily. The next morning, I was making tea when the doorbell rang. The sound was even slow, arrogant, the kind of a person who rings not to wait, but to command. I opened the door. Patricia Devon, Camille's mother, stood there. She looked just as she had at their engagement party. A cream cashmere coat, a triple-strand pearl necklace, and a smile with more arithmetic than goodwill. Mabel, dear, I hope I'm not intruding. Her voice floated, barely hiding the appraisal in her eyes. You're not. Please come in. She crossed the threshold and let her gaze sweep the living room. I recognized that look from people who live in luxury they don't admire. They appraise. The wooden chair I'd bought at a yard sale, the clock Harold once repaired by hand, the old picture frames on the wall, everything seemed to be filtered through a lens of money. Charming, she said, her mouth smiling but not her eyes. Cozy, if a bit. Modest. I poured tea and slid a cup toward her. Please. Patricia set her handbag on the table and clicked open the clasp. She drew out a check and set it. neatly between our cups. The words $50,000 were printed clearly. I looked up. She smiled, voice level, like discussing the weather. "This is not a bribe, Mabel. It's simply a way for both sides to benefit. If you could persuade Mr. Whitmore to keep the lease in place for Devon Realty's headquarters, this is yours." I leaned back and kept quiet a few seconds. Morning light coming through the window caught the tabletop, making the check gleam like a piece of metal. "Are you bribing me?" I asked slowly. Patricia smiled, tinged with arrogance. "I call it an arrangement. Smart people don't use the word bribe. This is a chance for you to help your family and receive a fair token in return." I glanced at the check again, then out the window. In the yard, the rose bushes Harold planted were still in bloom, their scent riding the breeze onto the porch. I remembered his mornings clipping stems, telling me, "Mabel, roses are only beautiful when no one pays for them." I turned back with a faint smile. "You know, Harold used to say roses shouldn't be bought with money. I think people shouldn't be either." I picked up the check, feeling the thick paper, the fresh ink. Then the sound of tearing filled the quiet room. She startled, eyes wide, but I'd already ripped it into 4 neat pieces and set them on the saucer. "My worth, ma'am, is not for sale." Patricia raised an eyebrow, her smile flattening to a thin line. "Be careful with grand statements, Mabel. In this society, no one is truly free. Your family, your son, his work, everything can be affected." I stood, walked to the door, and slid the bolt. 3 days ago, I might have been afraid. Today, I'm free. "Keep your social influence. I'll keep my self-respect." She looked at me a long moment, her gaze cooling. "You're making a mistake. If keeping myself is a mistake, I don't need to be right." A beat of silence. Then she lifted her bag and stepped out. Before she left, she turned back, leaving a trace of Chanel, number 5 inches the air. "I hope when the consequences come, you still have enough confidence to smile." The door closed, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and a storm of anger hanging in the air. I sat and looked at the shredded check on the saucer. Torn paper, but the ink still bright. Money is strange. It only has power if we let it define us. I gathered the pieces, dropped them in the trash, and washed my hands under the tap. Cold water slid over my fingers, rinsing away the grime of insult. In that moment, I felt an old part of me dying off to make room for something new, firmer, and freer. I picked up my phone and called Seb. He answered after the second ring. "I'm here. Mabel? Guess who came to see me this morning? I'm betting it wasn't someone delivering flowers," he joked lightly. I laughed, my voice still unsteady. "Patricia Devon. She brought a check for $50,000. I'm guessing so we can both benefit?" "You guessed right." "I don't think she liked the way I declined." Seb chuckled, a warm, low sound that drifted through the line like morning heat. "I'm proud of you, Mabel. Plenty of people would take that check and excuse it as practicality. But you're different," I sighed. "I don't want my life traded again. I was controlled for too long." "Then it's time we do the opposite," he said, steady. "This afternoon, come to my office. Meet Whitmore Capital's attorney. There are a few things I want to discuss with you." I was surprised. "An attorney? Is something wrong?" "Not trouble. An opportunity. Sometimes justice has to be rewritten by the very people who were dismissed." I was quiet for a moment, looking out at the yard where the sunlight lit the roses. "Are you sure, Seb?" "I've never set foot in a law office, I'm sure, and I want you there not for revenge so we can close out the old things." I smiled, feeling my heart suddenly light. "Okay, I'll come this afternoon." After I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the garden soak in the sun. The scent of roses drifted into the room, blending with the trace of Earl Grey still in the air. I thought of Harold, the one who taught me that self-respect isn't what we say. It's the choice we make when temptation shows up. And today, for the first time in a very long time, I chose myself. Not out of anger, but because I want to be free in this little house, in a rose garden no one can price. Outside, the clouds thinned, sunlight poured through the frame and fell across the tea table and the stray scraps of check, glinting like small streaks of a new beginning. That afternoon, I went to Whitmore Capital as promised. The tower's glass caught the sun, imposing and cold, the kind of architecture that reminds you power doesn't have to shout, it just sits higher. Seb met, and me in the lobby, still in that familiar charcoal suit and deep blue tie. He smiled softly when he saw me, his eyes both encouraging and gentle. "You're here. Nora's waiting in the conference room." The room was on the 27th floor, with cherrywood paneling and a long table under muted lights. The woman at the head of the table stood as we entered, attorney Nora Patel, around 40, petite, with eyes sharp as a fresh blade. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Carter. I've heard a lot about you from Mr. Whitmore." We shook hands, her grip warm but decisive. A thick file lay on the table, tabbed with blue and red flags. Nora opened her laptop, her tone calm and professional. "I've reviewed the full file on Devon Realty Group. You may want to know a few things." The screen showed a financial analysis, numbers, charts, debt ratios, but Nora never let me get lost. She explained slowly and clearly, like a teacher used to speaking to people outside the business world. Devon Realty is currently running a very high financial leverage. In plain terms, they're carrying more debt than they can reasonably service over the next 18 months. They are almost entirely dependent on their current building, where Whitmore Capital holds 100% control. I stayed quiet, feeling my heartbeat slow. If the lease is terminated, they'll have to move everything: staff, data, client contracts. The average cost will be more than $200,000, not counting reputational damage in the market. Seb sat beside me with his fingers laced, eyes on me, as if asking silently, "Are you ready for them to taste the bitterness they served you?" Nora flipped a page. "There are two options. Option A, terminate the lease immediately." I heard the rustle of paper as she continued. "Option B, sign a new lease. But this time on our terms." I tilted my head, questioning with my eyes. Nora slid a draft toward me. "The new rent will be 18% higher. The term will be only 3 years instead of 10. More importantly, this lease will include a special clause, an ethics disclosure." I frowned. "An ethics disclosure?" Seb smiled slightly and nodded for Nora to go on. She did. "Yes. This clause requires Devon Realty to carry out 4 public actions as a precondition to continuing the lease." She listed them, voice clear, without hesitation. First, a public apology letter to Mrs. Mabel Carter, posted on Devon Realty's official website and in 2 local financial papers. Second, a commitment to corporate conduct standards, including language on respecting and protecting the dignity of older adults. Third, an annual contribution to the Chicago Elder Justice Fund, overseen by Whitmore Capital. And fourth, establishing the Harold Carter Memorial Scholarship for construction students, worth $10,000 each year for 5 years. The room went quiet. I looked down at Harold's name, and my heart trembled. His name appeared neat and solemn amid a page full of numbers, a tribute I never dared imagine. "What if they don't accept it?" I asked softly. Nora answered, calm but firm. "Then the lease will automatically terminate 72 hours after they receive the proposal letter. No court, no dispute. We simply cut access and reclaim the premises." I looked up at Seb. He said gently, "Sometimes justice doesn't need a prison. It just needs a contract that punishes the right people." I stayed silent for a long time. In my mind, I saw Camille, those haughty eyes, the half-smile, the voice that had choked me at the wedding. I remembered sitting in the last row, my hands shaking while no one cared. And now I had a chance to make them face what they'd done, not with revenge, but with consequences. I'll sign, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Seb turned to Nora and nodded. Add her as a co-signer. She's the one who was harmed and the one who has the right to close this story. Nora smiled and jotted a few notes. I'll send the formal version to Devon Realty this afternoon. Their response deadline is 72 hours. She stood, gathered the files, then held out her hand. Mrs. Carter, it's an honor to see someone choose dignity over fear. I believe when a woman speaks up, many things change. I shook her hand, feeling the strength in those small fingers. When Nora left the room, Seb remained, his gaze warm and deep. Mabel, you know I don't just want them to learn a lesson. I want you to see that humiliation wasn't meaningless. You turned it into an outcome. I smiled faintly, a rush of hard-to-name feelings rising part relief, part weight. I don't want revenge, Seb. I just want them to know they can't belittle people and keep living like they did nothing wrong. I know, and that's exactly why this is right. Outside the building, the afternoon wind kicked up. I stood, on the steps a moment, watching the rush of people. Beneath the traffic noise, a strange calm settled inside me. When I got home, dusk had fallen. I lit a small candle in front of Harold's photo. His face was still gentle in the frame, his smile holding both faith and forgiveness. The flame quivered against the glass. I spoke very softly, as if whispering back to the past. I protected myself, love, and I kept the honor of us both. The candlelight shimmered, climbed the wall, and washed across my hands. Outside, the night wind off Lake Michigan slipped through the window, carrying the scent of roses from the garden, the fragrance Harold loved. For the first time in years, I felt I was standing in the right place, not because anyone lifted me up, but because I had finally chosen not to bow. 2 days after the formal proposal went out, I was reading by the window when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Bryce's name filled the screen, the third call in 10 minutes. I hesitated, then picked up. My son's voice came fast and panicked. Mom, you have to tell Mr. Whitmore to stop this right now. This is blackmail. I was quiet for a few seconds. Outside, the breeze stirred the curtain, morning light spilling across the table like water. No, Bryce, I said slowly. This isn't blackmail. These are consequences. On the other end, Bryce breathed hard, his voice tight to the point of breaking. They're demanding we apologize in public, set up a scholarship, and raise the rent by nearly 20%. You know that will kill the company. I'm trying to protect our family's dignity, yours too. I pressed my lips together and looked at the cold tea in front of me. Dignity, son? Where was your dignity when I was seated in row 14? When you let someone say your mother's poverty embarrasses us? No answer. Only Bryce's ragged breathing and a heavy silence stretching like a rope tightening at both ends. Finally, he spoke, lower now. Mom, I don't want to fight. I just want a deal. Tell me what you need to let this go. Money or something else? I gave a small laugh, not mocking, just bitter. A deal? Bryce, I don't need anything. I just want you to choose a side. A side? His voice jumped, surprised. Yes, between the family that humiliated me and the mother who gave birth to you. On the line, everything went still. I thought he'd hung up until I heard a rough, shaky whisper. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Think, I said. Because for the first time in your life, Bryce, you can't buy or bargain with your mother's self-respect. I was about to hang up, but paused, softening my tone. Do you remember when you were 8? You told me you'd never let anyone make me cry. On your wedding day, I cried. Not because I was insulted, but because you stayed silent. I heard a long inhale, then only quiet. A long quiet, heavy, as a decade of avoiding the mirror. At last, I said, gently like a goodbye, I hope you choose what's right this time. But I can't wait forever. Then I ended the call, refusing to let the conversation slide back into the old orbit where I had to soothe, yield, and soften other people's wrongs. That afternoon, I met Seb at a gallery in River North. No tension, no negotiating, just two people looking at abstract paintings for the penthouse Whitmore Capital was finishing. Seb wanted me to choose, but I've never been good at big decisions. For the first time in my life, I was about to say, "You pick," and stopped. I looked at a large canvas fields of blue and white, like the sky after a storm. "This one," I said, steady. "It makes me feel like I'm breathing." Seb smiled and nodded. "I think Harold would agree." I smiled back. "Harold would say this color shows dust too easily, but he'd agree." We stood together a long time, watching light strike. The wood frame. It felt strange in the best way to take part in a big decision without fear. No fear of being judged, no fear of being looked down on, no fear of being wrong. I realized the right to choose isn't a privilege, it's something I'd accidentally misplaced, loving too many people and forgetting myself. By the time I got home, twilight had settled. I set my bag on the table, turned on the light, and my phone pinged. Bryce. A short line, no period, no frills. "I need time." I sat with that message for a while. No anger, no joy, just an odd stillness. I typed back, "So do I, Bryce. But the clock is running." I put the phone face down and didn't check if he'd read it. I've learned love doesn't mean waiting without limits. Sometimes, to let someone grow up, you have to let them hear the ticking inside themselves slow, clear, and irreversible. That night, I took a warm bath, brewed lavender tea, and opened an old notebook. The yellowed pages, still, held Harold's handwriting. "To live is to know when to say enough when others think you won't dare." I closed the book and smiled. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan moved softly and long. I lay down, pulled up the blanket, and listened to my heartbeat. No regret, no anger, just the lightness of invisible cords finally loosening around my chest. For the first time in years, I slept well without nightmares. No scene of me being shoved to the last row, no cold laugh from my daughter-in-law, no averted eyes from my son. Only me, a 66-year-old woman, peaceful in a small house, knowing that when I wake tomorrow, no one can take my self-respect away. On the third morning after the proposal letter went out, I woke earlier than usual. Soft light spilled over the curtains like milk. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Hour 71. If the timeline held, there was just under an hour before the offer expired. I was making tea when a phone rang. "Seb." "Mabel, put it on speaker. I think you should hear this call." Richard Devon, chairman of Devon Realty Group, came on low, cool, and for the first time in years, I heard a tremor. "Whitmore. I'm calling to confirm we accept all the terms." A pause. I could picture him gripping a coffee mug, fighting to keep his voice even. "Including the public apology, the fund contribution, and the scholarship. We'll sign and return it today." Seb stayed even, no gloating, no edge. "Good." "On time." 4 short words, and the other side knew the game was over. I heard Richard clear his throat, then add, as if to salvage a little dignity, "We hope it ends here." "No one wants more damage," Seb replied, soft as a breath. "The only person who was damaged, Mr. Devon, has already stood up. The rest is just procedure." Then he ended the call. The room fell still. I stood by the tea, my hand trembling, not from joy but because I knew there was no way back. All that had been hidden under family honor would now be public. The insults, the contemptuous looks, row 14, "My mother's poverty embarrasses us," all of it would be written down and covered by the press. Seb set a hand on my shoulder, his voice warm and low. "You okay?" I drew a deep breath and nodded. "I'm not scared, just, it feels strange, like I'm stepping through a doorway I never dared touch." He smiled. "You're not stepping alone. Nora confirmed the apology venue tomorrow night at the country club during the Chicago Children's fundraiser. Devon Realty is the lead sponsor. They want to announce the signing and apologize right on stage. I raised an eyebrow. In the middle of a fundraiser? Exactly. They want to win back face by showing social responsibility. For me, it's fitting justice, bowing their heads where they were proudest. I was quiet a long time, then asked softly, "You think I should go?" Seb looked at me, steady and kind. "I think you've listened to others speak for you long enough. It's time to show up for your own story." I nodded, warmth and fear braided together inside me. Then, it's time. That afternoon, a text from Nora Patel arrived. "The final agreement has been signed." They sent the scan. "Tomorrow night, Mr. Richard Devon will read the apology. Media will be present." I stared at the words on the screen, then set the phone down. I knew that moment wouldn't just be a legal win, it would be a kind of moral justice. No one would be jailed, no one would lose their freedom, but everyone would have to face the truth of what they did. That evening, while clearing the table, my phone lit up. Bryce. I opened it to a short message. "Mom, I'll be there for the announcement. I think I need to hear it with my own ears." I read it again and again. A mix of warmth and worry rose in me. Part of me wanted to hold my son and say if he understood, I'd forgive him now. But another part whispered, "Don't go soft too soon, Mabel. Forgiveness should follow humility, not precede it." I typed back simply, "I know. Thank you for telling me." Then I set the phone down, inhaled slowly, and looked at Harold's photo on the table. His smile was as gentle as ever, steadying the flutter in my chest. That night, I opened the closet and took out the simple black dress Harold once praised. "Mabel, that color makes you look like a woman who knows exactly who she is," he'd said at our 25th anniversary party. It still fit. The fabric had softened with time. I pressed it, hung it on the window to catch the morning sun, then sat before the mirror. My hair was more than half silver now, but I smoothed it back and twisted it into a loose bun. No heavy powder, no bright lipstick, just a touch of foundation and small pearl studs. The lamp reflected a 66-year-old woman whose face was no longer taut, but whose eyes were clear. I looked at myself and whispered, "Not the woman in the last row anymore." I pictured tomorrow the bright room, the faces that once turned away, the shaking voice reading an apology. I didn't know if I'd smile, cry, or simply stand still, but I knew one thing. I would be there, head high, the way Harold would have wanted. Before bed, I got a short text from Seb. "I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. Not early, not late." I replied, "Bring the contract. I want to see it in our hands. It'll be there." And so will I. I smiled and set the phone down. Outside, the Chicago sky held a pale wash of orange. A light wind off the lake carried damp hints of water. I closed my eyes without fear. What I felt was something else, like being given my life back, not to retaliate but to close the circle. Tomorrow, the world might chatter and the news might run with it, but I knew that beneath the noise, this would be the day Harold would be proud and say, "You stood up, Mabel." At last. The next afternoon, Chicago's sky was unusually clear. Sunlight scattered over Lake Michigan like silver leaf. I sat in the car beside Seb, clutching my small bag, calmer than I'd expected. We pulled into the country club, the venue for the Chicago Children's fundraiser. A line of luxury cars moved through the gate. Staff in black and white uniforms hurried back and forth. Everything looked as lavish and polished as if nothing had happened in the world. But inside me, everything had changed. I had stepped out of the shadow of the woman in the last row. Today, I wasn't there to witness. I was there to be witnessed as myself. Seb parked, turned to me, his eyes both reassuring and proud. "Ready, Mabel?" I nodded. "It's time." The country club's main hall sparkled. Round tables draped in crisp white, rows of crystal glasses, perfume mingling with jazz. As Seb and I walked in, familiar faces from the wedding turned to look. I saw women who had whispered about my old dress, men who had once shaken Richard Devon's hand with deference. Their eyes had a new tone now, not contempt, but a mix of curiosity and caution. A server guided us to the front rows, near the press area. I spotted Bryce in the first row to the right, shoulders rounded, hands clasped. Beside him, Camille wore an emerald dress. Makeup immaculate, but even from a distance, I could see the faint tremor at her mouth. When the clock struck 7 p.m., the stage lights softened. The host announced a special moment of social responsibility. Then, Richard Devon, chairman of the group, took the stage, voice low and controlled, working to sound composed. Tonight, on behalf of Devon Realty, we offer a public apology to Mrs. Mabel Carter, who was shown disrespect by someone in our own family. He paused and looked to the front row. Camille stood. No wedding lights now, no proud smile, just a young woman with downcast eyes, a paper shaking in her hand. "I'm Camille Devon," she said, voice thin but clear. "On my wedding day, I said something unforgivable, that my mother-in-law's poverty would embarrass our family. I also put her in row 14 near the service area and left her there as if she didn't belong to us." A ripple moved through the hall. A few people raised hands to their mouths. Camille continued, her voice catching. "Today, I understand that wealth isn't what you own, it's how you treat people. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. And I'm sorry to myself for being so small." The room held its breath. No laughter, no chatter. Even the cameras stilled for a few seconds, as if no one dared break that strange moment. No one had ever confessed so plainly, and no apology had ever been so public. I stood and walked slowly to the handheld mic the staff extended. I didn't look at the crowd or the cameras. I looked only at Camille, the daughter-in-law who had made me feel like a shadow in my own family. "I acknowledge your apology," I said, even neither cold nor shaking. A brief stillness. "I'm not saying forgive, because forgiveness can't happen in a day. But I acknowledge it because maybe for the first time we're telling the truth to each other." Camille bowed her head. Tears fell onto the paper, crushed in her hand. I turned to Bryce. He lifted his face, eyes red, and I knew for the first time my son truly saw me, not as a mother meant to endure, but as a woman with the right to stand tall. The hall stayed quiet, and then the applause came, not loud, but real. Reporters began to shoot again, flashes strobed. I heard a whisper behind me. "Is that Mrs. Carter? The one they put in the last row?" She looked so steady. No one said it out loud, but I felt it. The social scales had shifted. Those who once kept silent in the face of insult were now watching a lesson in dignity, and they knew they couldn't dismiss it anymore. After the program, I left with Seb. Night had fallen, but the lights around the golf course still glowed. Crickets sang in the breeze. I took Seb's arm, shoulders back, steps sure, each one shedding a layer of heavy memory. A reporter hurried after us and asked, "Mrs. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stopped and smiled. Sometimes the silence of the weak is what makes the powerful smug. But when the weak stand up, the world has to listen. Then I walked on, without looking back. In the car, Seb squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than ever." He smiled, eyes gentle as wind. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. "Bryce." I opened a short message. "Mom, can we talk?" I read it once, then twice. I felt calm, no anger, no surge of emotion, just the quiet of someone who knows she's done her part. I typed, "Tomorrow, you start." I set the phone down and watched the streetlights recede like little dots of the past. The breeze lifted my hair. I exhaled long and easy, like slipping off a soaked coat after a storm that lasted half a lifetime. That night, Back home, I slipped off my shoes and stood before the mirror. In the reflection, I no longer saw a woman bowing her head, afraid of being looked down on. I saw Mabel Carter composed, silver-haired, clear-eyed, standing straight. A woman who had passed through humiliation and silence and, at last, found herself again. The next morning, when the light was still mixed with mist, I heard a car stop at the gate. From the window, I saw Bryce step out. No Camille, no luxury car, no security, no flowers. It was just my son in a wrinkled dress shirt, hands in his pockets, looking worn out like he hadn't slept all night. I opened the door before he could press the bell. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. His voice no longer had the confidence of a young executive, nor the coldness I'd heard at the wedding. I nodded. "Come in, son." We sat in the living room. On the table were 2 cups of tea I had just made. He looked around the old house, Harold's framed photos, the bookcases I've kept the same. Everything seemed smaller in his eyes, but this time I saw no scrutiny there, only a quiet observation, like he was trying to see what he'd once overlooked. After a long moment, Bryce spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry." Not an apology to end the story, but to start over. I said nothing, just set my cup down. He drew a deep breath and went on, "I've been under more pressure than you think. Keeping up appearances, maintaining an image, living by the standards of the upper circle, it all felt like shackles. I was afraid people would laugh, afraid my wife would lose face, afraid I wasn't enough. But in all that fear, I forgot the most important thing." I looked at him, silent. "I forgot you, and I forgot who I am." His voice caught a low note rare for a son who had always spoken like the wind. I answered slowly, "Bryce, I understand pressure, but remember this. Respect isn't a decoration to show off at a fancy party. It's a discipline for living. No one ever became poor by respecting others, but many became small by losing it." He bowed his head, fingers laced together. "I know, and I want to change, Mom. I'm just afraid you'll never forgive me." I exhaled slowly, then said, "Forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a process. But if you truly want to walk that road, I won't close the door." He looked up, a hint of hope in his eyes. I continued, "I only have 2 principles. 1, don't call me out of obligation. If you call, do it because you want to know how I'm doing. 2, the next time there's a family meal, don't leave me sitting alone. Invite me to the same table as someone who has a real place in your life." Bryce nodded, his voice soft. "I promise. Not because you asked, but because I want to." A warm silence settled between us. Outside, the wind stirred the rose petals in the garden, the one Harold used to tend. I knew that if he were still here, he would probably be smiling. That afternoon, I received an email from Nora Patel. The Harold Carter Scholarship has been officially signed. Devon Realty has sent the first funding exactly as in the contract. I read the line, and my heart dipped. Harold's name, after all these years, now appeared in a legal document not as someone gone, but as a recognized symbol of moral worth. I whispered, "Harold, you finally get to see your efforts weren't in vain." That evening, another message, Camille. "Mom, I want to meet privately to talk, not about work, about us." I looked at the words, no anger, no disdain, just tiredness. I typed back, "Not yet, Camille. When I'm ready, I'll let you know." Then I set the phone down and didn't read further. A few days later, Seb invited me to see Whitmore Capital's new project, a glass tower going up near downtown. When the elevator took us to the top floor, Chicago stretched, below river, homes, and streets crisscrossing like memories. Seb pointed outward. "This floor will be a community education and arts gallery. I want you to take a look. Maybe you'll have an idea." I walked the glass corridor, taking in the wide open space. Light poured through, making everything shimmer, opening a feeling of hope. After a while, I said, "I want a free reading corner for kids on the South Side. Many of them can't get to the library, but they still deserve to know what books are." Seb turned to me and smiled. "Perfect idea. I'll put you in charge of that part. Let's call it the Harold and Mabel Reading Corner, shall we?" I smiled, too moved to speak. "Are you sure?" "Sure. A building shouldn't just be tall, it needs a soul. And today, you just gave it one." That evening, as sunset washed the city, Seb spoke softly in the car. "In October, I have to go to Italy to oversee a project in Tuscany. Will you come with me?" I laughed. "Italy? I haven't been far from Chicago in more than 10 years. Then it's time, not to run away, but to say goodbye to fear." I was quiet. Fear, it had lived in me like a shadow, fear of being looked down on, fear of losing my son, fear of being forgotten. But as I looked out at the streetlights flicking on, I realized every fear shrinks once you start moving. "Okay, I'll go," I said, soft but sure. Seb squeezed my hand. "I knew you'd say that." That night I sat in my familiar room, a pen and a blank page on the table. I wrote to myself not to send, not for anyone else to read. The slanted letters trembled slightly but were clear. I lived too long in silence, in the fear of being looked down on, but today I know I have worth. Not because someone else says so, but because I choose to believe it. I set the pen down, folded the page, and tucked it into the old notebook where Harold once kept a list of rose varieties he wanted to plant. Outside, the breeze brushed through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers and the first chill of fall. I stood, looked out the window, and smiled. For the first time in years, the future didn't scare me. It opened quiet, warm like the morning after a storm, when everything is still wet, but sunlight has begun to slip through every leaf. 3 weeks after the public apology, a large bouquet sat at my door. Inside were carefully arranged white lilies, with a small card in a familiar hand, "Hoping for peace. Patricia Devon." I stared at the words for a long time. The flowers smelled light, elegant, and cold. I smiled and called the Children's Hospital in Chicago, where Harold had once supported a small music class before he passed. "I'd like to send this bouquet to the nurses in pediatrics. Please tell them it's from a mother who wants to thank those who still care with kindness." When the staff agreed, I felt a strange relief, like setting a stone down where it belongs. That afternoon, an email from Nora Patel. "Devon Realty has completed the first year of community commitments, the Harold Carter Scholarship, the service programs, and the fund for the South Side have all been launched on time." I read each line, slowly. It was no longer a battle of wounded pride, it was the continuation of fairness. I thought of the first students receiving scholarships in Harold's name, of the kids in the neighborhood holding new books from the reading corner Seb and I built. This wasn't just my win, it was a circle closed with meaning. On Friday evening, Bryce called. "Mom, I'd like to invite you to dinner. At my house, just family." His voice was gentle, careful, like someone walking on old wood floors, afraid to make a sound. I arrived at dusk. The house glowed with soft gold, nothing like the tense air from the last time I'd been there. When I stepped into the dining room, I stopped short, the long table, and my seat was in the very center. Bryce pulled out my chair and smiled. "This is yours, Mom. I want everyone to see you." I sat, my eyes landing on the empty chair across from me, a white rose placed on its back. Bryce said softly, "I think Dad should be here too, even if it's just with a flower." I couldn't help it. I nodded. "Your father always believed a table is only truly warm when everyone is respected." That dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the red wine Harold used to love. No fancy words, no soundtrack, just laughter that started shy and grew real with each story. For the first time in years, I ate in peace, not in silence. When the dishes were done, Seb leaned toward my ear, his voice soft as a breeze. For the next 20 years, let's rewrite it, shall we? I looked at him and saw the familiar smile time couldn't wear down. Okay, but this time let me choose the title, I said. He chuckled and squeezed my hand. On the way home, I thought about my journey. From row 14, where they parked me by the service area to save face, to the center of my own life. No one carried me there. I walked it myself, with pain, with steadiness, and with the belief that dignity can't be reassigned. I know forgiveness isn't a door that swings open with a single word. Forgiveness arrives only when people change long enough that apologies are no longer needed when actions prove they've learned the lesson of respect. I'll wait for that to happen, without rushing, without forcing, without holding a grudge. That evening, Camille texted, "Mom, I read the article about the Harold Carter Scholarship. I understand now. If you allow it, I want to start over." I typed my reply, each word firm. The door opens when you are truly ready to live differently, Camille. Not sooner, not later. Then I set my phone down and looked around my small home. On the table were my passport, a new travel journal, and a plane ticket to Tuscany. Seb had already messaged, "I'll pick you up at Florence Airport, and from there we start the new leg." I smiled and packed everything neatly. Tuscany is waiting, but this Chicago won't swallow me anymore. It has become the place where I stood up not with anger, but with self-respect. I opened the window. The October breeze slipped in, cool and gentle like an old touch. Streetlights spilled across the frame, lighting my face in the mirror, a woman who is no longer afraid of being forgotten, no longer sitting in the last row, but living in the front row of her own life. Thank you for staying with me all the way to this point. Maybe each of us has been pushed to the edge of a table, a story, or our own life just because someone decided we weren't important enough. But if you're still listening, I believe you've stood up from where they thought you'd sit forever. I want to hear your story. Where are you watching from in this wide world? Have you had a moment when you realized, I have worth too? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes a small share can warm someone who's quietly enduring, the way I once did. And if you want to keep walking with me through journeys of healing, finding dignity, and rebuilding trust, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Not for me alone, but for everyone who's been looked down on, to let them know someone understands, and there is still hope. I'll see you in the next story, where another woman is learning to smile after the storm.
I was tightening a stair rail when I heard violent pounding on the door. "Mrs. Holloway, open up immediately. We're here to seize the property." I hadn't even processed the words when an officer held a thick stack of papers in front of me. "You're past due on 3 mortgage loans taken out in your name. If you don't vacate, we're required to enforce removal." My heart dropped hard. I had never borrowed a single dollar. My fingers trembled as I flipped to the first page. My signature, forged so perfectly it made my stomach twist. And on the last page was my husband's signature, Harold Holloway, the man who had died exactly 7 days ago. I gripped the papers tight. If Harold had dragged me into hell, I would climb my way back out myself. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. I froze in the doorway. My hand shook so hard I had to grab the railing just to steady myself. This house, the light blue one on the corner of Willow Creek, where Harold and I had lived for 35 years, had suddenly become a trap I never knew I was standing in. The officer said a few more procedural lines, his voice flat like he was reporting the weather, but I heard nothing except the loud thudding in my ears. Something had collapsed, and the sound of it drowned out everything else. When they left, I shut the door and slid down onto the cold wooden floor. I held the papers to my chest, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. I looked toward Harold's framed photo on the shelf, him smiling, his arm around my shoulder at our 30th wedding anniversary. I'd always thought of him as solid, dependable, maybe overly cautious but trustworthy. I never imagined I would someday stand at this point in my life, facing the threat of losing my home because of the very man who had vowed to protect me until the end. But if I wanted to understand what was happening, I had to start with last week, the day Harold died. Harold passed on a Monday morning suddenly in his office at the accounting firm. A severe heart attack. No warning, no last words. When his manager called, I had been standing in the kitchen preparing a late breakfast. I remember dropping the spoon onto the floor. I drove to the hospital like someone out of her mind, but by the time I arrived, Harold was already cold. I cried. But strangely, the grief felt thin, like a layer of mist that could be blown away with the slightest breeze. At the funeral, instead of sinking into sorrow the way everyone expected, I felt something else entirely. One deep breath that carried a quiet, unsettling sense of relief. A feeling I immediately felt ashamed of. I had loved Harold, but in recent years, something in our marriage had shifted. He spoke less, snapped more, and above all, he strictly refused to let me touch anything related to finances. "You don't need to worry about that," he always said. "Let me handle it. I know what I'm doing." For 35 years, I believed him, and now I was paying the price. One day, after the funeral, when the house had returned to its familiar, unsettling silence, I received the first envelope, no sender name. Inside was a letter from West Shore Bank informing me that I, Evelyn Holloway, was the co-holder of a secret safe deposit box. I remember sitting in the kitchen chair, reading the lines again and again until my temples burned. In over 3 decades, Harold had never mentioned any safe deposit box. I didn't even know he used West Shore Bank. He had always talked about Union Federal. I called Justin, my son. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can we talk later?" "It's important, Justin. Is this about Dad's finances?" "Mom, it's nothing. Dad always had everything planned." He hung up before I finished my sentence. I called Mia, my daughter, hoping she would listen. "Oh, Mom, please. Dad always had his own things. Don't make a big deal out of it right now. I'm dropping the kids off." A sigh, a forced laugh, a dismissive sentence. I went silent. Why were both of them acting like Harold had warned them? Or worse, like they already knew something and weren't telling me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold standing at the closet, fixing his tie for Monday morning, smoothing the collar, grabbing his keys, and saying the familiar line, "I need to stop by the bank. Won't be long." For 35 years, he had never missed a Monday morning trip. I once thought it was just a workplace habit. I even found it endearing. But that night, sitting alone in the dim living room, surrounded by the smell of old wood and warm yellow light, a chill crawled over my skin. Harold hadn't gone to the bank out of habit. He had gone because of something he didn't want anyone to know, something he didn't want me to know. I stood up and turned on the light in Harold's old office. His neatly arranged files lined the shelves. Everything was so orderly it felt emotionless. I opened drawers. Most were empty or filled with unrelated documents. But when I pulled the lowest drawer on the left, I found a strange hollow space, the perfect size for a small metal box. Harold had kept something there, and now it was gone. A cold, prickling sensation slid from the base of my skull down my spine. I shut the drawer, walked out, and stared at the envelope from the bank. A secret safe deposit box. Harold's secret. Something he had protected throughout our 35-year marriage without ever sharing with me. I picked up the phone and called West Shore Bank using the number on the letter. The employee's voice was gentle but cautious, as if she had been expecting my call. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway, we confirm you're the co-holder. You can schedule a time to access the box." I swallowed. "Earliest time available, please." "We have an opening. Thursday morning at 10. 2 days away, long enough to fall apart from worry. After the call, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark living room. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than usual. I thought about my marriage, how I once thought Harold was simple, a man who worked, read the morning paper, mowed the lawn on weekends, kept our home neat like an audit sheet. But he had hidden too much, for too long. I thought about that strange sense of relief at the funeral, the one I tried to bury. Maybe my heart had sensed the truth long before my mind caught up. I buried my face in my hands. I didn't know what I would find in that box, but I knew it wouldn't be money or anything good. It felt like I was standing before a door sealed shut for years, and the key was now sitting in my lap. Thursday morning. That would be the moment everything shattered. And as I realized that, I heard myself whisper a sentence I didn't fully understand until much later. My life is about to be torn apart. I arrived at West Shore Bank nearly 30 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because I couldn't bear to stay in that house filled with Harold's shadows. Portland's morning was gray and misty, a layer of drizzle blurring the bank's glass facade. I stood before the glass, seeing my reflection, a 66-year-old woman about to face a truth that could destroy 35 years of marriage. The automatic doors slid open as I approached. A cold gust of air rushed over me. The place smelled of new carpet, paperwork, and a faint trace of coffee. I had never stepped inside before, even though Harold came here every week as if it were his second home. For years, I simply smiled when he grabbed his keys and said, "I need to stop by the bank." I never asked why. Now I wished I had. A woman in a navy suit approached, her smile wide enough to feel unnatural. "Mrs. Holloway, we've been expecting you." Her voice was soft, but her demeanor made me feel like I was walking into a boardroom instead of a safe deposit area. "Yes, that's me." I tried to keep my tone steady. "Please follow me." She walked quickly, decisively. I followed, feeling like I was being led into an examination I hadn't agreed to. Passing rows of desks and small offices, I noticed employees stealing quick glances at me before looking away. A man signing paperwork paused mid-stroke as we walked by. It hit me then. Harold had been a frequent visitor here, very frequent, enough that everyone knew exactly who I was, and maybe they knew what I was about to discover. The woman led me to a heavy door that opened with both a key and a card. It slid aside to reveal a vault room lined with metal drawers stretching endlessly, each one like a silver tooth, uniform and silent. "We've prepared box number 312 for you," she said with a slight nod. "Call if you need anything." I watched her go. Her excessive politeness, the lowered eyes, the soft voice, felt like pity. She knew what I was about to face, and I didn't. When she left, I stood alone in the cold, sterile room. On the table sat a long metal box, neatly placed as if it had been waiting for me all this time. When I touched it, I nearly pulled back. It was heavier than I expected, almost like it was filled with stones. I dragged it closer. The metal rail made a dry clicking sound. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. Inside were 3 thick folders, arranged with Harold's usual precision. Even his deception was tidy, and on top lay a cream envelope, thick, familiar, the kind Harold used for anniversary notes, but the writing froze my blood. Evelyn, if you're reading this. I set the letter aside instantly. I couldn't touch it yet, not before I saw what was underneath. I opened the first folder. The rustle of paper echoed too loudly in the quiet room. Investment summaries appeared, red numbers everywhere, losses, heavy losses, nearly 10 years of failed investments. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. Harold had thrown money into funds I'd never heard of. Reckless entries, bizarre transfers, some like tossing money down a well. He didn't just fail, he hid his failures by doubling down. I opened the second folder. My heart pounded. I braced myself, but it wasn't enough. 4 home equity loans against our house. I reread it. Then again, each loan in my name, my signature so perfectly forged, it could have fooled me if I didn't know I'd never signed anything like it. The house I lived in might have belonged to the bank for years. Harold had turned our home into a cover for his losses. He used my name as a shield. My vision blurred. My breath came short. Tears spilled before I realized it. When I opened the third folder, I didn't even try to steady myself. 18 credit cards, all in my name. Total debt over $130,000. I braced myself on the table to keep from collapsing. A cold wave swept through me. The tiny rows of text, the charges, the minimum payments, they were all my signatures. A flawless forgery. Harold had used my identity for years. How many? 5? 10? Long enough that I never saw it. I closed my eyes and all I saw was Harold on Monday mornings. Blue tie, white shirt, quick steps. I need to stop by the bank. I once thought it was responsible. It was desperation. A dagger slid through the softest years of my life. It wasn't just the debt or the lies. It was that Harold had turned me, the person who trusted him most, into the target of his mistakes. I sat there for a long time, unmoving. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. When my wrists ached from supporting my weight, I opened my eyes and looked at the envelope. I wasn't ready to read it. Not yet. Inside was an explanation, a confession, a justification Harold left behind for me to bear alone. I couldn't hear his voice, even through ink. Not yet. Not when I wanted to tear the letter apart. I put it back in the box. I needed air to stand up, to hold on to whatever strength I had left before my world cracked again. And in that moment, a truth settled heavily inside me. My 35-year marriage had never been what I thought it was, and the letter inside that box would change everything once I had the courage to open it. I closed the lid, turned, and walked out. The hallway light was warm, but it couldn't thaw the cold in my chest. I kept walking until the outside air hit my face. Only then did I notice my hands and legs were shaking. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat still. The mortgages, the forged credit cards, the counterfeit signatures, all of it swirled in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to cry and scream all at once, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't fall apart yet, not when the whole truth was still hiding inside that letter. I started the engine, placed my hands on the wheel, and whispered, though no one was there, "Harold, what else did you leave for me?" But I didn't go back to the bank. Not today. I needed time to breathe, to prepare, to become strong enough to read that letter, the one that would mark the point of no return in my life. And I knew. Once I opened it, I would no longer be the woman Harold once knew. I would become the one who faced him long after he was in the ground, and I would uncover the full truth, no matter the cost. I left the bank with the heavy metal box in my arms, but it took a long time before I had the courage to open it again. I kept it in Harold's old office, the room that always smelled of paper and oak, just the way he liked it. But every time I looked at it, my chest tightened as if someone's hand were squeezing my ribs. I knew the letter was inside, waiting. I knew the words would not only explain, but tear apart the softest memories I had left. I avoided it for 2 days. 2 days passed in a half-conscious state, doing things without truly being present in any of them. I made breakfast then, forgot to eat. I stood on the porch watching neighbors walk their dogs, heard them greet me, and responded only with an absent-minded, I tried to maintain a normal rhythm so I wouldn't fall apart, but the box still sat there like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. On the 3rd day, I woke up at 5 a.m., when Portland's sky was still a deep blue, quiet like a lake untouched by wind. I felt that if I kept avoiding it, I would lose the strength to read it at all. Fear could rip me in two, but uncertainty was even worse. I turned on the office light. The soft yellow glow spread across the wooden desk, tracing a thin outline of light around the box. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid. The letter lay on top, right where I had placed it before leaving the bank. The cream-colored paper was neatly folded, edges crisp. Harold had always done everything so meticulously. I took a breath, pulled out a chair, and sat down. When I opened the letter, it felt as if Harold were standing right behind me, silently watching. A chill ran down my spine, but I read, "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you." I stopped. My chest tightened. Even though everything he had done had pushed me to the edge, that tone, that way he said my name, still carried a piece of the man I once loved. I went on. "I'm sorry. There's no way to say this without hurting you. 8 years ago, I invested in something everyone called a sure win. I believed in it too much, and I was wrong." My eyes stung. 8 years ago. That was when Harold began changing. The nights he sat for hours in the office, the times he stayed up until morning staring at the computer screen, the sudden outbursts followed by quick apologies. Everything began around then. I thought I could fix it. Then I thought I just needed a little more time, but one investment led to another and one debt stacked on the next. I opened cards, I took out loans, I used your name. Not because I wanted to hurt you, Evelyn. I just wanted to keep us from collapsing until I found a way to make it right. I lowered the letter, my palms damp with sweat. Those words felt like poison seeping into my mind, layers of emotion piling over one another, anger, pity, confusion, heartbreak. He used my name to cover his mistakes, not once, not for a single debt, but for years. I swallowed hard and continued. "I know I put you in an unforgivable position, but I was afraid, Evelyn. Afraid that if I told you, you would leave me. Afraid of the way you'd look at me, eyes full of disappointment. So I hid it." I gripped the edge of the letter. Couldn't bear it. Harold always used that excuse. But what about me? Who cared whether I could bear it? I knew my heart condition was getting worse. I could feel time running out. I should have confessed. I should have let you prepare. But I kept hoping I could fix everything before it was too late. Then, my time ran out. A tear fell onto the edge of the paper. I wiped it quickly, but the pain spread like a bruise. Harold had spent the last years of his life not only drowning in debt, but terrified of facing the truth, and he left the weight of it on my shoulders like a boulder. "Evelyn, you will hate me. I deserve that. I did the worst thing a husband can do. I made you pay for my mistakes." I could hear my heartbeat, loud not from pain but from rising anger. I can leave you only this. Find the red file. It contains what you need to protect yourself. I stopped, eyes scanning the final line. I'm sorry. I love you. Even though that love couldn't save you from me. When I folded the letter, I had to put a hand over my heart to keep from collapsing. Part of me wanted to throw it away, tear it into shreds and burn it. Another part, the part that had loved Harold for 35 years, wanted to hold it close like a final relic. But the strongest feeling was anger. Anger at being betrayed. Anger at being treated like someone too fragile to face the truth. Anger that Harold had taken away my right to choose. I looked back at the box, searching through every folder, every compartment, every crease. There was no red file, no red paper, no red cover, no red label. Nothing. Harold said, "It contains what you need to protect yourself," yet he hadn't left it, or he had hidden it somewhere else. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The room was so silent I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Harold. How many more layers of secrets do you expect me to uncover? I whispered, my voice rough with exhaustion. But I knew one thing for certain. This letter wasn't the end. It was only the first door opening onto a path I had no choice but to follow, to the very end for myself. I folded the letter again, put it back into the box, but didn't lock it. I couldn't lock anything of Harold's anymore, not when there were so many unanswered questions. I stood up and walked out of the office, leaving the box slightly open like a wound that refused to close. No red file, no salvation in his final apology. Only me and the truth waiting ahead, cold as the Portland morning outside. I held the metal box for a long time before I was calm enough to call Justin. No matter how angry I was at Harold or how much I hurt, I still hoped my son could be someone I leaned on. Justin had always been the steadier one, the better listener. But when I dialed and heard the long rings, uncertainty crept in. "Mom, are you okay?" Justin answered on the fourth ring, sounding tired, as if I had just woken him, even though it was barely past 8 p.m. I took a breath. "I need to talk to you. It's important." A pause. "Is this about Dad?" I exhaled. "Yes. I found something he left behind. Not a will. A safe deposit box." A long silence made my heart contract. Justin was usually quick to respond, but this time he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "If it's financial stuff, Mom, Dad always handled that. You're just stressed," he said, voice too controlled, too calm. It unnerved me. "Justin," I said softly, "your father took out 4 mortgages on the house, in my name. I never signed anything. There are credit cards he opened, investments he lost. I have papers. He wrote a letter admitting it." Another silence. Then a small laugh, strained, uneasy. It made my skin crawl. "Mom, you're imagining things. Dad wasn't like that." One sentence, like someone had thrown ice water in my face. "Imagining? You think I made this up? I have the documents, the forged signatures, the—" "Mom," he cut in sharply. "Dad was an honest man. Everyone knows that. Maybe the bank made a mistake, or someone tricked him. Don't jump to conclusions." I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling my entire body grow heavier. "You don't believe me?" Justin sighed, long and weary. "I believe Dad." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. One short sentence shattered everything I had been hoping for. I called Mia next, even though my heart had already cooled. She was always the more emotional one, more sensitive. Surely she would hear the desperation in my voice. "Mom," she answered quickly. "I'm getting the kids ready for a bath. What's going on?" "Mia, we need to talk about your father." Her tone changed instantly. "What now, Mom? What else do you want to say after this whole week?" I looked at the open box on the table, the folders staring back like cold, unblinking eyes. "Your father hid financial problems from me for years. He took loans in my name, opened credit cards, failed investments. There's proof, a letter from him." I prayed the truth would make her pause, but instead she let out a short, cutting laugh. "Oh my God, Mom, do you really think Dad did something like that? What are you talking about? You know how responsible he was." "I'm not making this up," I said quietly. "There's evidence. There are forged signatures." "Mom!" Mia snapped, sharp enough to make me flinch. "You're grieving. I get it. But you can't talk about Dad like that. It's disrespectful." "I'm not disrespecting anyone." "You're being selfish," she pressed on, voice hardening. "Dad took care of this family. You know that. And now you're blaming him because you found something you don't understand? I don't believe you." It felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. "You think I'm lying?" "I think you're not well," Mia said, cold as glass. "You're hurting Dad's memory, and I don't want to hear it." Then she hung up. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before setting the phone down. Every bit of warmth drained from my body, leaving only cold space. My 2 children, the biggest parts of my life, didn't believe me, or rather, they refused to believe the truth. To them, Harold was still the perfect father, the steady figure they had admired their whole lives, and I was just a grieving woman imagining monsters out of grief. That night, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the living room window. I sat in the dark, no lights on, watching the streaks of water slide down the glass like cracks forming across the surface. The silence in the house made the rain louder, like the breathing of someone in pain. I thought of the look in Harold's eyes those last years. Sometimes he stared at me as if he wanted to confess something, but swallowed it instead. I once thought it was stress, work, age. Now I knew. It was fear. Fear of being found out. I thought about Justin, his strange calm, the way he defended Harold without hearing my full story. A faint instinct pushed me to replay the call in my mind. No, Justin wasn't indifferent. He was defensive. But why? For whom? And Mia's anger. I didn't blame her. Harold was her hero. He drove her to school every morning, helped her with math homework, held her every time she cried. The idea that Dad lied to us all was simply too heavy for her to bear. Sometimes the truth is too cruel for young people to accept. As for me, I had no choice. When I started to stand up, the phone rang again. I thought it was Justin or Mia calling back, but when I looked at the screen, I saw the words from West Shore Bank. Early foreclosure notice. Confirmation of enforcement. My hands went numb for a moment. I opened the message. It was a short summary. Because the loans had not been paid on time, the ones I never signed, the bank would begin foreclosure procedures within 30 days if there was no response. I exhaled a long breath that felt as if it dropped to the floor and shattered. Everything was falling apart too fast. No husband, no children who believe me, no home secured. I understood one thing with a clarity sharp enough to raise goosebumps. If I didn't save myself, no one else would. I stood up and turned on the living room light. The warm yellow glow fell over the metal box, waiting on the table, like a reminder that the path I needed to walk had only just begun. No matter how angry, how hurt, or how alone I felt, I had to stand firm. Because if Harold had left me a battlefield, then I would fight until the very end to reclaim my own life. The next morning, I woke with the heavy sensation of someone who had climbed through a long, dark slope. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table beside a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Everything felt like a warning that I no longer had time to hesitate. I needed someone on my side, someone who understood the law, someone who understood the kind of damage I was carrying. I remembered the advice of a neighbor who once went through a financial dispute with her ex-husband. She had mentioned a female attorney downtown in Portland, Rebecca Ortiz, a specialist in financial abuse within marriage. She said, "If anyone can help you, it's her." I took out the business card she had given me and dialed. The woman's voice on the other end was steady, quick, and sounded accustomed to dealing with clients on the verge of panic. She asked a few basic questions, then scheduled an appointment with me that very afternoon. I drove into downtown, misty rain speckling the windshield, heavy oak leaves drooping with water along the roadside. Portland in the rainy season always felt as if it collected the world's sadness and spread it across rooftops. But I couldn't take in the scenery anymore. All I knew was that I was searching for a final lifeline. The building where Rebecca worked had large glass panels and long steel lines, cold but strong. I stepped inside, hands wet from rain, feeling myself slowly descend into the white, chilled brightness of office hallways. At the reception area, a brown-skinned woman with neat curls and a black suit stood as I walked in. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. Her voice was warm but sharp, like a wire pulled just tight enough. "Yes," I answered. "I'm Rebecca Ortiz. Please come in." Her office had large windows overlooking the traffic below, and the late afternoon light filtered through the rain in blurred streaks. Rebecca gestured for me to sit, then pulled a small leather notebook from her drawer. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning to the end. Don't leave anything out." I nodded, then began speaking. My voice was weak and broken at first, but when I opened the folder of documents I brought, when the numbers, the signatures, and Harold's letter lay between us, the story poured out on its own. I told her about the mortgages, the forged credit cards, the failed investments, and finally the letter he left behind. Rebecca listened without blinking. She didn't show pity, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she set her pen down. "Evelyn," she said gently, "this is a very typical case of financial abuse in marriage, but its scale is greater than most I've seen." "Abuse?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. The word tightened my chest. "Yes. When a spouse secretly destroys the other's finances, steals their identity, creates debt behind their back, uses forged signatures, that is abuse. And your case is severe." I looked down at my hands. I didn't know anything. I lived with him for 35 years. "Financial abusers are often excellent at hiding things," Rebecca said slowly. "They don't need violence, they only need control of information." My throat grew hot. Harold hadn't just hidden things. He had stripped me of the right to know, the right to decide, the right to live freely. Rebecca continued, "You can win this, but we must prove you didn't sign any agreements, and we must prove you had no knowledge and that your signature was forged. I have bank records and Harold's letter." Rebecca nodded. "Good, but we need more. You'll have to gather receipts, statements, documents from the past 10 years, everything related to your family's finances." 10 years? The words chilled me. How could I possibly gather things Harold had controlled entirely? "Did Harold keep any notes?" she asked. "I haven't searched thoroughly," I said. "His office is still untouched." Then start this evening, she replied. Find anything that could serve as evidence. I'll send you a detailed list. I nodded, even as my heart pounded. I was afraid to return to that room, afraid of finding memories I once trusted now turned into masks. We talked for a while longer, and then I stood to leave, but Rebecca stopped me. Evelyn, she said quietly, this journey won't be short. It won't be easy. It will force you to face things even more painful than what you found in that box. You'll get angry, exhausted, maybe even want to quit. I met her eyes, but I have to save my home, my name. Not only that, Rebecca said, you're saving the rest of your life, and you cannot collapse. I gripped the strap of my purse. I have nothing left to lose. Rebecca nodded. That is exactly when people become strongest. As I drove home, the rain grew heavier. Drops pounded the windshield, blurring everything as if the world outside were melting. Part of me wanted to drive fast and get home quickly. Another part wanted to turn the car around, leave Portland and start a new life in some small town. But I knew I couldn't. Not now. I parked under the porch and stepped inside, my heart heavy as lead. Harold's office was dark, the door cracked open as if inviting me, or daring me, to enter. I turned on the light. The smell of oak and old paper filled the room. Everything looked the same as before, but as I examined it carefully, I noticed something familiar. A brown leather notebook with a slightly peeling corner tucked in the bottom drawer. It hadn't been there the day before. Or perhaps I simply hadn't seen it. I opened it. Harold's handwriting. So familiar it made my heart jolt, but the content inside chilled me. Detailed notes, dates of loans, days of failed investments, amount lost, minimum payments. The first time he forged my signature, each page was a knife. No apology, no explanation, just numbers, written carefully like a private confession. I flipped to the last page. He had drawn a heavy line under a note. Contacted appraiser to sell Evelyn's mother's wedding ring, not enough to cover payment. I froze. That ring. My mother wore it for 40 years before she died. I kept it as my most precious keepsake. I never imagined Harold would even touch it, but he had gone to get it appraised. He hadn't sold it, but he had considered it. The thought made my knees weak, but I didn't scream. I just stood there trembling. It took time before I could steady myself again. I knew I needed to gather everything. I needed to be stronger than the betrayal. I collected the notebook, stacked the documents in the box, clipped each file Rebecca required. When I walked out of the room, I felt as if I had aged years in one afternoon. But there was something else inside me, a faint spark, small but real. I was no longer standing in Harold's shadow. I was stepping out on my own, shaken, unsteady, but stepping forward regardless. And in that moment, I knew Rebecca was right. I had nothing left to lose. And when someone has hit rock bottom, there is only one direction left to go, upward. That evening, after gathering all the documents from Harold's office into a large box to bring to Rebecca the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, preparing to send her a few scanned pages to review. But when I opened my computer, something felt off. A small email icon blinked in the corner. Not in my main inbox, but in an alternate account I had nearly forgotten existed. I froze. A strange unease crept into my chest. Harold had helped me set up that account years ago, saying it was for emergencies in case you lose your password. I had never used it since. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as if intuition itself were trying to stop me, but I opened it anyway. The inbox lit up. Time rolled back, and a single 6-month-old message appeared from an address I recognized immediately. Harold.Holloway, Archive G. Its subject line was only 3 words, "For Evelyn only." My heart thumped hard once. Harold had never emailed me like that, certainly not to the account even I barely remembered. I clicked the message. Inside was a single attachment, red file zip. I knew right away. I had found the red file Harold mentioned in his letter, the one he said would help me survive. I hesitated a moment, then opened it. A folder appeared containing nearly 20 PDFs, each numbered, and one final text file labeled, "Read this first." Text. I opened it. Just a few lines. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, I no longer have the chance to fix the damage myself. You will be angry and you have every right. But if you want to prove your innocence, you must have evidence. This is everything. Harold." I went still. His tone wasn't like the man who wrote anniversary cards. It wasn't soft. It wasn't an attempt to ease my pain. It was a confession. Blunt and merciless. I opened the PDFs. The first file listed banks, the loan officers, dates signed, amounts, and scanned loan forms. I saw the forged signatures clearly. The curved strokes, the hesitant pressure. If someone else had forged my signature, it wouldn't have looked so perfect. But this was Harold, the man who saw my signature every day, who signed our house purchase 30 years ago next to mine. The second file listed every credit card he opened, all 18. Some used to pay short-term loans, others covering losses in investment accounts, some just making minimum payments before falling into debt. The third file held all of Harold's failed investments, each page marked with little handwritten notes he added before saving the documents. I thought this would save us. I just need more time. Can't let Evelyn know, she'll break. I was wrong. Each note pierced me. I didn't know what hurt more, his years of deception or the fact that he thought I was too weak to handle the truth. The fourth file made my breath catch. A list of every forged signature he had ever used for loans or cards. Next to each scan, Harold had written a single line. I committed a crime. I put a hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. Everything confirmed what Rebecca had said. This was financial abuse of the highest level. Then I opened the final file. A spreadsheet Harold titled, "Evidence Evelyn is Innocent." It listed every loan, every date, every forged signature, with notes. Evelyn did not know. Evelyn was not present. Evelyn did not sign. Evelyn received no benefit. My vision blurred. The cruel irony was that the man who destroyed me was also the one who left behind the only tools that could clear my name. Harold had made me a victim, but he had also left the key to escape the trap he built. I didn't know whether to thank him or curse him. The next morning, I brought everything to Rebecca. She opened each file, her expression shifting, from calm to serious to astonished. "Evelyn," she said slowly, "this red file is the strongest weapon you have. Not everyone who commits financial abuse leaves behind material like this. Harold didn't just admit fault, he documented every single unlawful act he committed." I lowered my head, rubbing my fingers together to steady myself. Rebecca leaned toward me. "With this, we won't just prove you're innocent. We can petition to void every loan, wipe out all credit card debt, and restore your financial standing. Courts take self-incriminating records like this very seriously." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But Evelyn," Becca continued, "the red file tells us something else. Are you certain Harold did all of this alone?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" She turned the monitor toward me. Some transactions show a secondary name or someone Harold asked to open temporary accounts. That name is redacted in the bank copies you brought, but in the red file, Harold wrote one line. She zoomed in, a small note at the bottom of the page. Jay knows about this. I promised him it was a sure-win investment. He shouldn't have been dragged in. My head rang. Jay. Just one letter. But I knew. I knew without thinking. Justin. As I reread the note, a memory flickered from the day before. Justin's strange calmness. The way he grew defensive when Harold came up. The way he avoided my eyes when I asked questions. My hands shook. Rebecca. What do you think Justin knew? I can't conclude anything, she said, but Harold recorded that your son participated in at least part of this process. Maybe he was persuaded. Maybe he thought he was helping temporarily. Maybe he didn't know how serious it was. I held my head in my hands. Oh God, Justin. Rebecca softened her voice. You need to talk to him. But be careful. When people fear being implicated, they often lie. I nodded, unsure if I had enough breath left to speak a single word. That evening, while I was sitting at my desk, Justin suddenly appeared at my door. He didn't call first, didn't warn me. He just stood there, tense-faced, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. Mom, he said, eyes flicking toward the box of files on my table. I heard you're investigating something? I need to know what you found. I looked at my son for a long moment, noticing the way he avoided eye contact, the slight lean of someone preparing to defend himself. In that instant, I knew Justin had known more than he'd ever said. He had known for a long time, and I knew this too. The truth between us was no longer a bridge. It was a wall I would have to break, no matter the cost. Justin stood in the doorway, hands shoved deeper into his pockets, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. I opened the door wider, giving him space to come in, but he stayed right at the threshold, not entering, not leaving. He scanned the house, the home once filled with family laughter. Then his eyes settled on the box of documents. Mom, we need to talk, he said, voice rough. I nodded and stepped aside. Justin walked in but didn't sit. He stood beside the table, the light hitting his face in a way that made his eyes darker, more tired. I heard from Mia that you're digging up Dad's business, Justin began. I let out a slow breath. It's not digging. It's the truth. A truth I didn't choose, but one I have to face. Justin bit his lip, inhaling as if bracing himself. Dad once asked me to put my name on a loan, he admitted, staring at the wooden floor instead of me. I blinked. When? 3 years ago. Justin stepped back slightly. Dad told me his small company hit a temporary snag. He said he just needed my name for a little while, that it wouldn't affect anything. No one would know. He needed a trustworthy signature. My knees weakened. Did you sign it? No. Justin shook his head quickly. I refused. But I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to ask why Dad needed my help for a big loan. I didn't want more tension in the family. He finally looked up. I thought Dad was just having a small problem. I didn't know it was this big. I realized Justin didn't hide the truth just because of fear of Harold. He hid it because he was afraid to face the possibility that the father he idolized could do something wrong. You know, Justin, I said softly, but my voice didn't shake anymore. I'm not angry at you for not telling me sooner. I'm angry that you still don't believe me, even when the truth is sitting right here. Justin clenched his fists. Mom, I don't know what to believe. I grew up seeing Dad as strong, dependable, the man who always fixed everything. To me, he could never be wrong. And that's the problem, I replied. Because you believed he was perfect, you dismissed every piece of evidence, even when it was staring you in the face. Justin went silent, and I saw it. A quiet collapse inside him, like stone cracking from within. No noise, no drama, but real. That collapse never reached Mia. If Justin had at least listened, Mia chose the opposite path entirely. 3 days after my talk with Justin, she called, her voice sharp as a blade. "Mom, I don't want to hear any more of you slandering Dad. I'm sending back the things you gave me." Before I could explain, she hung up. That evening, just as I was about to lock the door, I heard a car brake hard outside. Mia stepped out, her coat whipping in the cold wind. She didn't knock, didn't greet me, didn't even look at me. She walked straight to the porch and threw the stack of documents onto the steps like something filthy. Papers scattered across the damp concrete. "If you want to destroy the image of Dad, go ahead," she spat, "but don't drag me into it." I bent down to gather the pages, my fingers freezing. "Mia, I sent them so you'd know the truth, not to make you hate your father. I never wanted that." "But that's exactly what you're doing," Mia shouted, tears spilling, though she backed away as if afraid I'd touch her. "Dad can't defend himself anymore, and you're turning him into a monster. I won't accept it." She turned, climbed into her car, and slammed the door so hard it felt like the sound hit me in the chest. When she sped off, I stood alone in the entryway, Portland wind cutting cold around me, papers scattered at my feet. I didn't pick them up right away. I watched the road in the direction Mia had driven, feeling emptiness expand inside me. My 2 children, the people I carried, raised, and loved through most of my life, were fighting me. Not out of malice, but because the truth was too big for them to face. I wasn't angry at them. I was devastated that Harold had made me the bearer of the bad news, the one forced to shatter the illusion he'd built in their minds. When I told Rebecca everything at our next meeting, she stayed silent for a long moment, then said, "Evelyn, truth always comes with a cost, and you're paying with the fracture of your family." I looked down at my hands. I don't want to lose my children, but I also can't let myself be dragged down by Harold's mistakes. "You're not doing anything wrong," Rebecca said firmly. "You're stepping out of the darkness he created." I gave a weak smile. "But my children, they're still standing inside that darkness." "They'll step out eventually," Rebecca said, "but not today, and you must keep going, even if you have to walk alone." I nodded, feeling, for the first time in months, a small, steady ground under my feet. "I'll keep going," I said. Rebecca nodded. "You must keep going." That night, when I came home, I turned on every light in the living room. Warm yellow light washed over the piles of documents, over Harold's deposit box, over the scratches on the floor where Mia had thrown the papers. I stood in the center of the room for a long time. I had lost Harold, in every sense. I was losing my children, in the most painful way. I was losing my home, unless I fought for myself. But I realized something else. I had never stood for myself before, never fought for myself, never allowed myself to be the one steering my own life. And if everything I was losing now was the price of finally finding myself, maybe it was a price I could accept. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and placed them on the table. Then I opened my computer, pulled up the red file, and emailed Rebecca the additional documents she needed. When I clicked send, I knew I had taken a step Harold never imagined I could take. a step out of his shadow, a step towards saving my own life. Even though no one else was in the house, I still said it out loud, "I'll see this through." The next morning, when Rebecca emailed to inform me the financial abuse petition had been officially filed with the court, I stood frozen in front of the screen, as if I had just heard someone declare the beginning of a war. No turning back, no waiting for Harold to return and explain everything, no hoping it would somehow go away. I stepped onto the porch and breathed in Portland's sharp, wet air. Wind rustled through the oak leaves in the yard, carrying the smell of damp wood. The sky was heavy and gray, but something small and solid had taken shape inside me. Not peace, but resolve. About an hour later, Rebecca called. "Evelyn," the bank responded. Her voice dropped half a tone, and I tightened my grip on the phone. "What did they say?" "They claim you benefited from the marriage, so you're responsible for the loans he took out while married to you." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Benefited? I'm facing foreclosure. How exactly did I benefit?" Rebecca sighed. "That's how banks operate. They cling to the concept of marital assets and push liability onto the surviving spouse. But we have the red file. We have forged signatures. We have transaction histories. And we have Harold's confessional record." I sat down at the old wooden kitchen chair. The house was so quiet I could hear every tick of the wall clock. "Are you ready for this stage?" Rebecca asked. I nodded, though she couldn't see. "I don't have any other choice." 2 weeks later, the real battle began. Rebecca hired a handwriting expert who once worked for the FBI, a tall, thin man with silver hair and eyes sharp as metal. He arrived with a large case full of scanning equipment, magnifiers, and comparison software. "I'll need every genuine signature you've written in the last 15 years, he said. I dug through everything: library cards, hospital registration forms, volunteer certifications at the community center, even Christmas cards I'd signed for neighbors. Harold had always told me not to worry about paperwork, so my authentic signatures weren't as numerous as his. As the expert compared them, I stood beside him, feeling my chest tighten with every breath. He ran a magnifier across the curves of each real signature and said clearly, "Your real signature is steady, downward strokes even, spacing consistent." Then he opened the documents Harold used to obtain loans. It felt like someone was peeling skin from my wrist, slowly, deliberately. "This signature is not yours," he said, marking it. "This one isn't either. Different pen pressure. The pen movement is completely different. This is sophisticated forgery, but still forgery." He worked for 4 straight hours without taking a break. By the end, he stacked all the documents into 2 piles. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said, 92% of the signatures in the bank files are not yours. I'll prepare a detailed report with technical analysis for the court." I looked at the 2 piles, feeling my eyes sting. One pile held the real signatures, few, simple, scarce. The other held the forged ones, identical to mine in a way that chilled me. All of them had been used by the man I once trusted completely. I felt both pain and relief. Relief because the truth had been confirmed by an expert. Pain because Harold had practiced my signature until he mastered it, which meant he forged me, not once, but many times. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. He shook his head. "You're stronger than most people I've met." I couldn't tell whether it was a compliment or condolences, but the bank didn't stay quiet. 3 days later, I received a large envelope. No logo, no sender name. Inside was a typed letter. "Mrs. Holloway, we warn you to stop spreading false accusations and distorting financial records. This behavior indicates signs of collusion and intentional evasion of responsibility." I read it once, then again. I let out a laugh with no joy at all. Collusion, evasion. I was the only person in the house who hadn't signed a single thing. But to them, I was the easiest target to push around. An older widow who didn't know the law, who had no one to protect her. They had no idea I had found myself in this battle. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Rebecca. Just minutes later, she called me. "Evelyn, this is intimidation. We'll strike back. The red file will be the centerpiece. The bank can't deny the existence of documents Harold left behind. What do you want me to do? Keep every piece of correspondence and prepare yourself. The first court date is coming." I began to change myself quietly. I was no longer the woman who waited for Harold to bring home the money, waited for him to explain the finances, believed blindly that he was always right. I started reading every line of law Rebecca sent me. I learned to interpret legal terms. I tagged documents with color tabs. I printed files, arranged them by timeline, and noted every loan and every forged signature. Each morning, I made coffee, opened the documents, and worked as if everything depended on me, because it did. Every afternoon made me feel 10 years older, but I also felt something else. I was steadier than I had ever been. No more trembling at Harold's name. No more fear of what my children thought. No more feeling like a passive bystander in my own life. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and saw the woman I was at 35, when Harold first brought me to this house, but her eyes were different now, lined with age, touched by pain, yet still burning with fire. The court date was set. Rebecca sent a short text. "March 17th, be ready." I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from knowing I was standing at the biggest crossroads of my life. That night, as I turned off the living room lights and prepared for bed, my computer chimed with a new email. I opened it. An anonymous message. No subject, no signature. "Stop, you will regret this." Below it, a single line. This wasn't just Harold. I froze, my heart pounding. Not Harold, not only Harold, and someone out there didn't want me to continue. I stared at the screen until the blue glow stung my eyes. But instead of frightening me, the message fueled something I had been building day by day. Anger. Stubbornness. The determination of a woman who had been pushed to the bottom and feared nothing anymore. I closed the laptop, stood up, and whispered firmly, "I'm not stopping, whoever you are." On the morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm could ring. Dim Portland lights seeped through the curtains, covering the room in the somber gray of March. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle over my shoulders. More than a year of gathering evidence, confronting my children, fighting the bank. All of it led to this moment. I put on the navy coat Rebecca recommended, tied my hair back, and studied myself in the mirror a little longer than usual. The woman looking back had a face marked by experience, eyes no longer trembling, though not entirely hardened. Something soft remained, perhaps regret. Regret for a 35-year marriage. Regret for children forced to see a new picture of the father they loved. I left the house early. A light rain fell. Drops hit the windshield like suspended punctuation marks in an unfinished story. The courthouse parking lot was crowded, more than I expected. Financial cases always drew quiet, watchful attention. Before I could enter the building, I saw Justin standing in the hallway. Gray shirt, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. His face looked exhausted, but when he noticed me, he straightened a little. "Mom," he said softly. I nodded. "Thank you for coming." He opened his mouth to speak, but the click of heels echoed behind him. Mia appeared. More makeup than usual, but eyes swollen, as if from sleepless nights. She avoided my gaze. "I just want to see how this ends," she said. That was all. But it was the closest she had come to me since everything began. The courtroom was packed. 2 rows of benches, every seat filled, whispers floating in the air as Rebecca, her team, and I entered. It felt like stepping onto a stage, except the lights were cold fluorescent bulbs, not warm amber lamps. Across the aisle, the bank representatives sat stiffly, faces carved from stone, a cluster of polished lawyers, each with a laptop, each with eyes sharp as blades. They didn't look at me like a victim, they looked at me like a threat. The judge entered. The gavel struck. The hearing officially began. The bank's attorney opened with predictable words. "Your Honor, under Oregon law, marriage constitutes a financial community. Therefore, Mrs. Evelyn Holloway is legally responsible for all loans and debts incurred during the marriage, regardless of who signed." He recited the lines without emotion, formulas instead of arguments, but each word pierced me like a pin. He continued. Furthermore, there is no evidence that Mrs. Holloway was entirely unaware of these transactions. We suspect implicit consent, perhaps even collusion. I heard a faint hiss behind me, Mia whispering, "They're accusing Mom." Rebecca rose, tapping the table lightly before stepping forward. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "the bank relies on the concept of marital assets, but they purposely ignore the nature of this case, financial abuse within a marriage, and we have evidence." She signaled to the technician. A large screen lit up. "We present an audio recording of Harold Holloway, now deceased, speaking with his private attorney 6 months before his death. In it, he explicitly asks about the legal risks of using his wife's forged signature to obtain loans." A shockwave rippled through the room. I glanced at Justin. His face had gone pale. Mia raised a trembling hand to her mouth. The recording played. Harold's voice filled the courtroom, low, strained. "If, hypothetically, I used my wife's signature, would the court see that as fraud?" His attorney's voice replied, "Absolutely fraud, and if she proves it, the bank bears the loss, not her." Harold again, voice shaking. "I just wanted more time. I didn't want her to know." Someone behind me let out a broken sound, maybe a stranger overwhelmed. My fingers tightened until my knuckles whitened. The judge nodded slowly. When it was my turn to testify, my legs felt like stone. But when I set my hand on the wooden rail, a strange calm washed over me, as if I finally knew exactly what needed to be said. "Mrs. Holloway," the judge said, "please describe your marriage and why you claim you knew nothing about the loans." I looked at him, then at the room. I saw Justin wiping his eyes. I saw Mia caught between disbelief and heartbreak, and I began. I trusted my husband for 35 years. I trusted him so completely that I never opened a single financial file, never logged into the bank account, never asked why. I thought that was trust. But now, I know I misunderstood. I paused. Trust is not consent to betrayal. A small sob broke from somewhere behind me. Justin covered his face with his sleeve, shoulders shaking. I spoke of the hidden papers, the Monday bank trips, the times Harold told me, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." I told them about the foreclosure notice, the moment my world collapsed because of the man I loved, not as a plea, not as a lament, as the truth. Rebecca presented the red file. She laid each document before the court. Real and forged signatures, Harold's handwritten confessions, his failed investments, and the ledger of deception he left behind. Mia stood abruptly, her eyes shattered. "Mom was telling the truth," she whispered. Dad did all of this." I wanted to hold her, but she sat back down, trembling. After nearly 3 hours, the judge rose, gathering the documents. "The court has reviewed the evidence, testimony, and the self-recorded admissions of the late Mr. Harold Holloway. This court finds Mrs. Evelyn Holloway bears no legal or personal responsibility for the loans." My heartbeat slowed to a steady, heavy thud. "All mortgages, credit debt, and financial obligations resulting from forged signatures are hereby voided." I closed my eyes. "The property, including the house, is fully restored to Mrs. Evelyn Holloway." I exhaled a breath I felt I'd been holding for years. Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it." I turned and saw Justin rise, his face wet with tears. Mia was crying too, but her eyes now held no doubt, only sorrow, only understanding. I stepped outside the courtroom. The sunlight was brighter than I remembered. I stood on the stone steps as my children approached slowly. They didn't speak. They didn't hug me. They didn't apologize. They just stood beside me. Two silhouettes struggling to rebuild their understanding of the world. I had won, but I had also lost a part of my family, because sometimes the truth is more merciless than anything I ever imagined. I gripped my bag strap, lifted my chin, and walked down the steps carrying both the victory and the ache that had no name. That afternoon, after the hearing, I returned to my home, the home that had nearly been swallowed by a whirlwind of debts I never created. When I opened the door, I felt the familiar quiet, but it no longer pressed on my chest the way it used to. The late sunlight slipped through the curtains, bathing the room in a warm, golden hue. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without pain tightening in my chest. I made myself a cup of herbal tea, set it on the table, and settled into the old armchair. I thought I would sit there for a long while, letting my body and mind slowly recognize that I had truly climbed out of the abyss. But not even 5 minutes passed before the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a neighbor checking in, or perhaps Rebecca stopping by. But when I opened the door, I saw Mia standing there. She was still wearing the outfit she'd had on at the hearing. Her eyes were red, her nose flushed, mascara smudged faintly down her cheeks. The evening wind tossed her hair, and she held her purse tightly to her chest, as if she were afraid something inside might break. "Mom," her voice cracked. I'm sorry." I stood still. I didn't know how long I'd been waiting for those words. Maybe since the day Harold died, maybe since the moment I discovered everything, or maybe since the night Mia threw the documents onto the steps and walked away without looking back. Mia stepped inside, automatically closing the door behind her. Then she broke down. Not the restrained, angry crying I had seen before, but the way a child cries, like the little girl she once was at 6 years old, who would run home whenever thunder scared her. "I trusted Dad so blindly," she sobbed. I never thought he would do something like that to you. I thought you were trying to ruin his name. I was wrong. I was terribly wrong." I placed my hand on her shoulder. She collapsed into my arms as if she had been waiting months for someone to hold her again. I stroked her hair, feeling her body tremble against me. "It's all right," I whispered, even though my heart was breaking with each tear she shed. "You trusted your father because you loved him. I never blamed you for that." "But it must have hurt you so much," Mia cried. "You faced all of this alone, and I turned my back on you." I didn't deny it. I didn't want to revisit it. Holding her in my arms, I realized forgiveness isn't erasing the pain. It's allowing both of us to walk forward without being chained to what happened. An hour later, Justin arrived. He stood at the door looking uneasy, holding a thin stack of papers. When he saw Mia sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea and red eyes, he flinched slightly. Then he sat next to her and turned to me. "Mom," Justin said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart tightened. Last year, Dad sent me some documents. Justin placed the papers on the table. He asked me to keep them because you didn't need the stress. I read them, but I didn't understand everything. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to tell you. He lowered his head. I didn't want to upset you. I didn't want to confront Dad. I didn't want to break the image I believed in my whole life. I opened the papers. Just as Justin said, copies of old loan forms, notes Harold had written about risk, late payments, waiting until next week to fix it. Every line was a warning sign that Justin had been too young, too unprepared to face at the time. I exhaled, placing my hand over his. "You were wrong," I said gently but honestly, "but you came here to say it, and that means a great deal." Justin looked up, eyes wet, but clearer than I'd seen in a long time. "I'm sorry, Mom." For the first time in months, the three of us sat together, not as fractured pieces of a broken family, but as people trying to find their way back to one another. I made more tea, set out a plate of biscuits, and in that small kitchen, once filled with cold silence, the air warmed bit by bit. No one spoke much, but the silence wasn't sharp anymore. It felt like the warmth from an old heater, soft, steady, slowly thawing places in our hearts that had been cold for too long. I said, "Your father wasn't a monster." I looked at Justin, then Mia, but he wasn't a saint either. Mia lowered her head. Justin nodded slowly. Both of them understood now. A person can love deeply and still cause deep harm. And sometimes those left behind must learn to hold both truths at once. We talked until dusk, not about debts or lawsuits, but about good memories. Beach trips, Christmas dinners, nights when Harold told them old stories. No one tried to deny he had hurt me, but no one denied he had loved us in his own flawed way, either. My family, though scarred, was finding its way back. A few weeks later, I started working at Helen's Book Nook. Helen, the woman who had encouraged me throughout the ordeal, stood behind the counter with her warm smile and those sharp eyes that always seemed to understand more than she said. "I knew you'd come," she said when I asked for a job. I laughed. "Helen, you didn't know that." "No," she tilted her head, "but I know someone who survives a storm often wants to stand again and do something meaningful." Helen taught me how to shelve books by theme, how to recommend the right story to the right reader, how to recognize someone searching for a book to fill an empty place inside. One afternoon, while I was labeling new arrivals, Helen walked up to me. "Evelyn," she asked, "what did you learn from everything you've been through?" I set down the novel and thought for a moment. "I learned," I said slowly, "that I'm not as weak as I thought, and I'm not strong in the way I expected either. I just survived, and from that, I learned how to live again." Helen smiled. "That's resilience." I realized then that every woman who walked into this shop carried her own story, and I, with all the ruin Harold left behind, could now understand them in a way I never could before. I wasn't just standing up again. I was being reborn. That evening, when I locked the shop and stepped outside, the sky was turning a soft shade of purple. I looked up and suddenly understood something clearly. Harold left me in ashes, but I rebuilt my life from those ashes, and the rest of my life, for the first time in a very long time, belonged entirely to me. After that night when my children and I finally sat together again, my life found a new rhythm, slow, gentle, but fully within my control. I still worked 3 days a week at Helen's shop. I loved opening the door in the early morning, the scent of old books mixing with the coffee brewing behind the counter, the soft chime of the wind bell whenever a customer walked in. It was a kind of peace I never knew I needed so much. But the ordinary days in the shop began to change when I noticed certain eyes, not those of people searching for a good novel, but eyes filled with hesitation, worry, sometimes fear, hidden behind polite smiles. The first was a woman around 50. She lingered in the self-help aisle, fingers brushing the spine of a book about financial independence without opening it. She looked at me, took a breath, and asked softly, "You're Evelyn, right? You went through what they wrote in the interview Helen posted on the board?" I nodded. She bit her lip. "I think something is wrong in my home, too, but I don't know where to start." We sat in the reading nook. She told her story in fragments. Her husband controlled all bank accounts, gave her money only in small amounts, told her she couldn't handle numbers, sometimes pressured her to sign papers she wasn't allowed to read. Each detail felt like I was listening to my own past self, the woman who thought ignorance would keep her life peaceful. I gave her a few resources, showed her how to check her credit, urged her to speak with a lawyer. When she left, her hands were no longer shaking. I thought she was an exception. She wasn't. Within weeks, 5 women sought me out, all unsure, all anxious, all unaware they were experiencing financial abuse. Helen saw what was happening even before I did. One afternoon, she placed a hand on my shoulder while I was reorganizing the book display. "Evelyn," she said, "if this keeps happening, you need a space for them, not the checkout counter." I looked at her, not fully understanding yet. "You mean a support group?" Helen nodded, smiling gently. "A small one, led by someone who's walked through it. They trust you." The idea made me nervous. I'd never led anything, certainly not a group built on vulnerability and pain. But that night, as I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once shaken opening envelopes from the bank, I realized something. I had walked through hell, and I didn't want anyone else to walk through it alone. So the first support group met in the little storage room behind the shop, surrounded by towers of old books. The first night, only 3 women came. They held their cups of tea tightly, as if afraid hope might spill out. I began with my own story, not shaking like in the courtroom, not choking with grief, just telling it, honestly, plainly, without bitterness. When I finished, one woman burst into tears. Another squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you. I finally feel like I'm not crazy." The group didn't stay at 3. Week 2, 6 women. Week 4, 10. By the second month, we didn't have enough chairs. There was a retired teacher, an online shop owner, a young woman married only 2 years, but already denied access to her own bank account. All different, yet all shaped by the same sentence from a man in their lives: "Let me handle everything." I didn't give advice quickly. I let them hear themselves speak, because that's the first step to believing their own truth. One evening, we helped a woman named Clarissa. Her husband had opened 11 credit lines under her name. She was the shyest of all, always sitting at the edge of her chair, hands twisting, voice trembling. Rebecca agreed to advise her, and in 4 weeks, Clarissa had 3 loans dismissed. When she brought the news, her whole body shook as she said, "I thought my life would end because of that debt, but there's a way out." We clapped like children receiving gifts. Watching her smile through tears, I felt something shift inside me, something warm and fierce. That night, Helen came in with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Do you understand, Evelyn?" she asked. "You're turning pain into a legacy of healing." I had never thought of it like that, but hearing her say it, I felt its truth in my bones. All the nights crying alone, all the shame, all the fear that the world believed I was a liar. Those experiences had carved a path I never expected to walk, a path where I wasn't the wounded one. I was the guide. I started changing. I walked with straighter shoulders. I spoke calmly but firmly. I stopped fearing phone calls or letters. I learned not only to protect myself, but to teach others to protect themselves. When the group reached over 20 members, I created a small fund to help women afford legal fees. I named it Second Light, because the second light in life doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from within, when a person finally steps out of the dark. Helen hugged me when I announced it. "Evelyn," she said proudly, "you didn't just rebuild, you're helping others rebuild too." I looked at my hands, the same hands that once trembled, holding Harold's forged documents, the same hands that once shook signing paperwork just to survive. Now they were steady. They no longer belonged to a deceived wife. They belonged to a woman who had risen again. And I knew the journey Harold forced me into, however cruelly, had brought me to where I was always meant to be. In the middle of my life, I had found myself again, and from myself, I found a way to light the path for others still lost in the shadows of betrayal. 1 year after Harold's death, I stood again before the glass doors of a bank, but not West Shore, where I used to walk in trembling, afraid one more breath would make my world collapse. This was a different bank entirely, bright, modern, free of any memory tied to the days when I was dragged toward ruin. I paused for a few seconds, straightened my collar, and took a deep breath. I was no longer walking in with the legs of a wounded woman. I walked in as a survivor. The teller smiled warmly. I returned a soft smile, the kind I never thought I could make again after everything I'd endured. "I'd like to open a new account," I said, "in my name only." No one else added, no shared access, no more allowing anyone to exploit, forge, or hide behind my life. The teller typed my information and asked how I wanted my name to appear. I lifted my head and looked straight at the screen. "Evelyn Holloway Reyes," I pronounced clearly, each syllable closing an old door and opening a new one. Reyes, the hyphenated name I had always loved when I was young, before I chose to set it aside to become Harold Holloway's wife. I had spent too many years living under a name someone else chose for me. When the new account card was placed into my hand, something in my chest loosened, not with sadness, but with a strange, quiet peace. I pictured the months I had survived, the financial shocks, the forged documents, the nights I sat in the dark afraid to turn on the light, the legal battle that drained me, the countless tears I shed, and the moment I stood before the judge and said that trust is not the same as agreeing to be betrayed. I once thought I would never rise above any of it, yet here I was, signing for a new account, a new life, with a new name that belonged entirely to me. I walked out of the bank. The afternoon light poured across the sidewalk, and I felt warmth spreading through my chest. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of traffic, the sound of voices, the soft rustle of leaves brushing against each other. Everything around me carried on as if it were an ordinary day. But to me, this was a turning point. I was no longer the woman who let Harold decide everything for 35 years of marriage. I no longer lived in anyone's shadow. I no longer searched for excuses to forgive the unforgivable. I had become the woman I was meant to be long ago. When I returned to the bookshop, Helen was sitting behind the counter reading a newspaper. She looked up and smiled as if she already knew what had happened. "Evelyn," she said, "you look different." "Different how?" I asked, though I felt the difference myself. "Like someone who just cut off an invisible chain," Helen replied. "Lighter, freer." I laughed, a sound I once believed I had lost. That evening, when the support group gathered in the storage room, I told them about the new account, the new name, the feeling of taking back my own life. No one applauded loudly, but the women sitting closest reached out and gently squeezed my hand. The kind of squeeze shared by people who understand one another through pain endured and strength rediscovered. I looked around the small room glowing under warm yellow light. Every face carried its own wounds, but the eyes were brighter than when they had first walked through the door. I thought of Clarissa, who had escaped the debt her husband created in her name. I thought of the young woman who cried after discovering her husband secretly transferred money into private accounts. I thought of the women who would come here in the future, carrying the same question I once carried: am I crazy for doubting the person I love? I knew the answer now, and I was ready to give it to them. After the meeting ended, I watched the women walk out, clutching their coats, standing straighter, stepping with more confidence. A profound warmth spread through me, a feeling I'd never imagined I would experience, the feeling of belonging to myself. When I locked the shop and paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the darkening sky, I realized that this journey, though full of pain, had brought me exactly where I needed to be. I had endured betrayal, loss, humiliation, suspicion, and even the heartbreak of my own children turning away. I had stood before a judge, before a banking system, before the memory of the man I once believed was my lifelong anchor. I had lost so much, but in the end I found myself again, and that was the greatest victory. As I walked toward my car, I thought of the people reading or listening to this story. Maybe they are carrying doubts they're afraid to admit. Maybe they are in a marriage where silence is being used to hide something. Maybe they fear the truth because they believe the truth will destroy their lives. But I am living proof of this. The truth may hurt you, but lies will kill you slowly. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Don't let love blind you to reality. Don't let your sacrifices become a weapon someone else uses to control or destroy your future. And above all, remember that there is always a way out, always a second light, just as I found mine. Before we part, I want to leave you, the person reading or listening, with a message from my heart. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for taking the time to hear my journey. If you've ever faced similar pain, I hope my story can be a small lantern so you don't feel alone. Where are you watching from? Which state or which corner of the world? Share it with me in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and stay for the next one. I'm grateful for every one of you walking this path with me, because you too are part of the light that helps me continue telling my story.